Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Helped Aizawa Take Over UA? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Shota let out a hot breath of air as he hid his face deeper into his capture weapon, long black hair curling around his head and shoulders in the process. Sure, his makeshift scarf provided at least some solace from the low temperature that came with early January, but it still wasn't enough to completely shield him from the cold. And the air conditioner in Nizu's office that kept blowing more air into his face certainly wasn't helping. He crossed his arms and sunk a little deeper into the plush green chair. It's only been a few minutes since he was called into Nizu's office, but he still doesn't know the reason why he's here in the first place. He'd never say it out loud to the mouse? Bear? Chimera? He'd never say it out loud to his boss, but for a genius with a quirk like high spec, he made some pretty illogical decisions sometimes. It was currently 7:08 in the morning on a Monday, a time when he would usually be taking his pre-class nap, but instead, he's been dragged into this jasmine tea-smelling room to discuss God knows what. If he doesn't get at least 15 minutes of sleep before having to deal with his hell class, his mood will be even worse than it normally is, forcing everyone around him to deal with the fallout. And Nizu should know better than anyone that a person should never want to be caught in the crossfire between Shota and his sleep-deprived antics. The last time it happened, well, he won't go too much into detail, but let's just say that by 2:45, multiple glass windows had been shattered as a result of a chair barreling through them, and Vlad King ended up needing a few sessions with Hound Dog. Shota was still thinking about the traumatized look on Vlad's face when a clinking sound broke him out of his stupor. A cup of steaming Earl Grey tea was placed in front of him along with a small plate of lavender shortbread cookies. His favorite. So Nizu taking the bribery route today? Interesting. The underground hero narrowed his eyes as his boss hopped onto his chair, sitting directly across from him behind the desk. His boss took the time to straighten a stack of papers before finally speaking. Aizawa-kun. Nizu chirped, nodding his head in greeting. Shota grunted in return. I assume you're wondering why you were called in here today, right before you could take your morning nap? Oh, so he was aware of the risk he was taking, good to know. Shota gave another grunt. I suppose I've already wasted enough of your time, so I'll just get straight to the point. The Hero Commission called me yesterday afternoon, organizing a meeting with me tomorrow to discuss the funding and budget of UA with all of its donors and alumni. Unfortunately, this event will be held in an off-site location outside of Mizudafu, thereby requiring me to take an untimely business trip. Normally this wouldn't be a cause for concern, but in this case, the event is a week-long matter, due to a particularly stubborn hero, and I won't be able to look after UA until my return next Monday. Therefore, Nizu trailed off, unsaid words still floating the cold air around them, but Shota didn't care. He didn't need to hear the rest of the Chimera's sentence to know exactly what he was implying, and that he sure as hell didn't like it. No, Shota stated, not bothering with an explanation. Because Nizu sure as hell didn't need one to understand either. I truly do apologize for the inconvenience this may cause for you and your students, but I really have run out of all other options. The rat stated, not looking apologetic in the slightest. None of the other staff members would be fit for the role of the temporary principal besides you, Aizawa-kun. No way. No way in hell was he going to take over this job, even if it's just for a week. He's seen his boss on multiple occasions typing at the speed of light on his computer as well as signing hundreds of forms and letters in a single day. There's no possible way for Aizawa to handle that workload on top of his own lesson plans, teaching, and patrols. Are you absolutely sure about that? Shota pressed in a slightly pleading voice. What about Mike? He would throw too many parties and nothing would ever get done. Midnight. There would be too many SXL harassment lawsuits. Fair enough. He still doesn't know why she's allowed around teenagers. No, not him. Shota scowled. He would rather give up all his naps than live to see the day where Sekijiro Ken of all people became his superior. Snipe. The erasure hero was leaning forward, eyebrows furrowing as his hands gripped the arms of his chair so tight that his knuckles turned white. To anyone who paid close enough attention to details, it wasn't hard to sense the man's desperation for a way out. Unfortunately for him, the only one in this room who fit that description was Nizu, a well-known SST that made Shota seem like some merciful Holy Spirit in comparison. Not emotionally available at the moment as he is currently battling his romantic feelings for Kayama-san. Shota shot back down. For the love of God dash. As you can see, me appointing you as principal is the only logical decision available, Nizu said, eyes gleaming with ruthless satisfaction at the hero's suffering. Logical, Shota mentally sneered. How dare he throw his own words back at him? And that's not even the worst part, no. The worst part about all of this was that Nizu was completely and utterly right. He always was, and that's what Shota hates most about him. It's just, Shota sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. You've seen what happens when I miss a single nap. Do you really want to see what I'm like when I cut out over 3 more hours? Yue will feel his wrath and burn to the ground. That's what'll happen. No, I do not. And we won't have to. With that, Nizu lifted a single piece of paper with his paws and slid it over the desk to Aizawa, whose eyes scanned over the contents of the page. This would be your new schedule this week, should you take my offer. Some things stay the same, but it's mostly a complete reorganization. You won't take this job because it would be too much to juggle on top of your hero patrols and teaching. His quirk is high spec, not psychic. How does he always manage to know what people are thinking? It aggravated the underground hero to no end. But things can be arranged to lighten the load. Class 2A's Heroics class would be merged with Class 2B, much like the joint training session you guys had last year, except for a week. Therefore, you would only need to manage your class during homeroom, and lesson plans and assignment grading would be left to someone else. Who? Shota dared to ask. Nizu's face broke out into a sinister smile that screamed tales of agony and pain. Vlad King. God freaking damn it, this was getting to be too tempting. Nizu knew exactly what he was doing by assigning the work to Kan, but Shota refused to take the bait. Furthermore, your duties as a principal would differ from what I usually do. I may be miles away from the Mizudafu district, but that will not prevent me from making the usual calls and sending out my usual emails. All you would need to do here is check up on other people's work and make sure that everything is business as usual. Sure, you might need to handle the disciplinary actions for students who get sent to this office, but I doubt that'll be too difficult for you. Okay, so maybe he was taking the bait. Shota's slowly crumbling resolve must have shown on his face, despite his best attempts for them not to, because suddenly Nizu became even more chipper than usual as he began to cackle madly, tea spilling everywhere. He shivered. Is this what his students feel like whenever he flashes his logical ruse smirk at them? Wonderful. He feels dead inside. I'll inform the staff of this recent development and leave it up to them to tell their respective classes. In the meantime, I suggest you start preparing your new courses of action. Pardon? New courses of action? He grumbled out, words slightly muffled from underneath his scarf. This may be a temporary position, Aizawa-kun, but it still grants you all the powers I would usually have in the day-to-day affairs. For the time being, you're allowed to manage the school in all the ways you see fit, with little need to refer to your coworkers. Or should I say inferiors? The heroics teacher microscopically perked up in his seat, a gleam of interest entering his charcoal-colored eyes. It was at times like these when the attendants of UA High School were able to see the similarities between the grumpy underground hero and the evil genius that was Nizu. Both of them had signature smiles that could put the fear of God into anyone it was aimed at. Both of them would do whatever they needed to accomplish their goals, barreling through obstacles like a sadistic bulldozer. And most importantly, both of them could analyze words and situations with an inhuman amount of precision, calculating every possibility and loophole available to them. The last of which Shota was doing right now at this very moment. Nizu said he would be given all the powers and superiority that came with this new position, and he knew full well what that statement entailed. Question is, how far did Nizu expect him to take that power? How far could he take that power without getting fired and having his teaching and hero license revoked? He wasn't aware of what he was limited to, But that didn't mean he was going to outright ask the Chimera. Not asking questions means not getting an answer, but in this case, that answer could go against everything Shoto was hoping to achieve with this new development. So he stayed silent. Now then, any more questions? Nizu hummed. Yes, actually. I have 3. Nizu nodded his head, signaling for him to proceed. First off, when exactly are you leaving for your trip? Nizu checked his pocket watch. In exactly 16 minutes, 46 seconds, and 13 milliseconds a car will arrive at the gates of UA to take me to the airport. Nizu held out his hand and gestured to the opposite side of the room, where a single miniature suitcase rested beside the door. As you can see, I'm already packed. Shota sighed for the 15th time today. Of course, Nizu called him in here on short notice, already knowing that he would take the job offer. He chose to push down his irritation with his boss and continue. Second, is it too late to go back to sleep? Yes. Well, at least that's out of the way. Shota paused before asking his next question. Depending on the rat's answer, this week could either be a lot easier or a lot harder. Hypothetical new courses of action would require a lot more time and effort than usual, but I'd like to get it done as quickly and efficiently as possible. Therefore, I'm thinking of taking someone on as an secretary, of sorts, to help out. God, he hopes this isn't the biggest mistake of his life. I'm assuming it didn't take you any longer than 2 minutes to arrange a new schedule for me. Would you be able to do the same for a student? Nizu grinned, baring his sharp teeth, and hovered his pen over a new blank sheet of paper. All I need is a name. Yeah, this was definitely the biggest mistake of his life. From the moment Izuku stepped into class, he knew something was wrong. But he seemed to be the only one that noticed it. He can't exactly blame the others, though. To the untrained eye it looked completely normal. Ida was reprimanding his classmates, as usual, chopping his hands up and down in frustration as they refused to get into their seats. Ashido, Siro, and Kaminari were throwing Vine references back at each other, pointedly ignoring Ida. Hagakure, Tsu, after much insistence he finally calls her that, and Uraraka were busy discussing the latest chapter in some shoujo manga. And Kirishima was retelling a manly story to Kachin with tears pouring down his cheeks as the explosive blonde's hands sparked in anger. Like he said, completely normal. But there was something off in the atmosphere of this room that he couldn't quite place his finger on. Izuku quickly made his way over to his chair, politely asking Mineta to not sit on his desk as he had been doing recently. He didn't want to be rude, he really didn't. But he'd rather shut it down now instead of seeing it become a habit. Before sitting down, the strange feeling still hadn't gone away. He'd taken a head count and everyone was present in class today, so it couldn't be any of them. Did they have a test today in English? Or was that next week? Was there homework he didn't know about? Oh God, he picked the wrong time to lose his planner. Usually, he had no trouble remembering things, but this morning had him feeling all paranoid. Are the legs on his chair uneven? Is the temperature slightly colder than yesterday? God damn it, stupid D. Shut the hell up. Izuku flinched, silently apologizing to the blonde before sinking deeper into his seat. Kachin certainly got a lot calmer compared to middle school and their first year at UA, but old habits die hard. Or in this case, old habits die after Kachin beats them to death with a stick slowly and painfully. His short-tempered classmates still couldn't stand the sound of his endless string of mutterings. Or his obsessive note-taking in his hero analysis notebooks. Or his face. He basically couldn't stand the concept of Izuku in general. Midoriya. A low voice said, and he perked up his seat to face the culprit. You seem to be quite fidgety today. Is anything amiss with your spiritual aura? Izuku ignored the language used, far used to his Tokoyami's antics by now. The green-haired teen gave a wobbly smile and sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed to know that someone had noticed his odd behavior. Sorry about that, Tokoyami, just one of those days, why you know? For all Izuku knew, that could have been the truth. But even if it wasn't, he didn't want to make his friends worried by sharing his own unreasonable concerns. Thanks for asking, though. Tokoyami nodded, but still seemed unsatisfied with his answer. The silent consideration in his classmates' eyes seemed familiar. In fact, it reminded him a lot of Mr. Aizawa. Izuku whipped back around to face the front of the classroom, eyes scanning furiously over every little detail because this had to be it. This had to be what was bothering him all morning. He knew Kacchan was giving him the side eye, but Izuku couldn't seem to care right now. He had more important things to do than worry about whatever was bothering him now. Finally, his searching stopped as his gaze rested on his dry-eyed teacher, who was currently leaning against his podium and waiting for class to start instead of in his signature yellow sleeping bag. For any other teacher, this would be considered normal, more than normal. But this isn't just any teacher. This is Aizawa-sensei. A man who cherishes peace and quiet above all else, perhaps even his own life, and second only to cats. Aizawa-sensei wouldn't dare not take advantage of spare time to get a quick nap in. After all, that's what he does every day. The one time he hadn't taken his morning nap was during their first year, the 22nd of April, to be specific. The only reason Izuku even remembers the exact date is that he'd written down all of the events that transpired that day in hopes that it would never happen again. Honestly, he's never been more terrified of his teacher than he was during homeroom that day. And he thinks he can speak for everyone when he says that he does not want a repeat of that occasion. But just because he doesn't want it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Is this innocent Monday morning going to be as disastrous as the last one was? Should he start running to Nizu's office and call another window repairman? Or should he just head back home and pray that Aizawa-sensei's wrath is limited to a single building and not the entire district of Mizudafu? Before Izuku could dwell on it any further, the school bell rang and his classmates scattered into their seats. The ninth user of One for All made a silent prayer to whatever god was listening and waited for all hell to break loose. Class, his grumpy teacher began, today's lesson will be a little different. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, he knew it. He has to warn the others, but how? Should he pass around a note, or would that be too obvious? Maybe he should try out some Morse code and pray they know what SOS is. And that's because I won't be the one teaching it. Come again? He saw his classmates looking confused at the statement, and he couldn't help but relate. I won't be available during any other class besides homeroom, so you'll be doing joint training for the week with Vlad King and Class 2B for Heroics. He grumbled out, and Kirishima raised his hand. Hope you don't mind me asking, but why won't you don't be available? Apparently, that was the wrong question to ask because the nonchalant expression his teacher had on his face faded into something reluctant and pained. Usually, Aizawa-sensei wasn't this easy to read, so his answer must be something pretty serious. Maybe it was the reason why he skipped his nap? Izuku placed his hand on his chin, a habit he developed whenever he was deep in thought. I suppose it's better you asked now rather than find out later. What did that mean? Nizu's going on a week-long business trip with the Hero Commission and has asked that I take his place for the time being as principal. The underground hero spat that word out with so much loathing and disgust it made Izuku wondered what made him accept the job in the first place. However, this is Nizu that asked him to be principal, and it was foolish to think there was ever another option besides yes. So I won't have time to teach you guys at the same time. In the middle of his mental rant, it finally occurred to Izuku. Aizawa-sensei was going to be principal. Principal. He saw Ishido's and Kaminari's eyes widen in fear, and had to agree. God have mercy on the poor souls that get sent to his office. Oh, and that reminds me, Izuku snapped out of it and looked back at the teacher, who just happened to be staring directly at him. The green-haired child flinched. Why was he looking at him? Oh my god, did he say that mercy part out loud? Is he going to be sent to his office now? He whipped his head around in every direction, trying to determine by his classmates' expressions if they had heard him. Midoriya, you're also excused from every other class besides homeroom. Ha! Lucky Bisudi. Mido Wegi? So manly. I knew the aura was off. Izuku froze, his brain short-circuiting just like Kaminari when he reaches his voltage limit. He was out of it enough for the only reply to come out of his mouth being, "Huh. Is this some sort of suspension? No, that couldn't be it, or else he'd be banned from everything. Aizawa-sensei shows no mercy." So what exactly was he being punished for? Nizu and I have decided that as long as I'm principal, there needs to be someone who can keep pace and document everything that happens down We have agreed that someone is now you. But needs notes. Izuku sputtered, still not understanding a single thing that was being said as he frantically waved his arms around. The only thing he could comprehend right now was his friend's incredulous looks, Uraraka especially, all directed at him. Nizu left 30 minutes ago, actually, Aizawa said, checking the clock on the wall, and we need to get started right away. So it'd be appreciated if you could get a move on. The hell? Why was he of all people chosen? Sure, he takes a lot of notes, quite obsessively according to Uraraka, but quantity doesn't equal quality. Ida would be much better for the job, Momo too. They are some of the top students, after all. And besides, his notes are limited to school work and hero analysis, not. Whatever this is. How could they possibly expect him to do a good job on this when he has no experience in this topic? While Izuku was muttering, he didn't notice the gray capture weapon shooting towards him and curling around his torso, effectively picking him up out of his seat. He also didn't notice said capture weapon floating him out the door and down the hallway with Aizawa-sensei leading the way. He only became aware of his surroundings when he heard the sound of the door shutting behind him and his feet making firm contact with the ground again. He looked up to see Aizawa-sensei staring down at him, hand outstretched towards him holding a fresh notebook and a brand new mechanical pencil. The kind of pencil you would stare at in a store but never be allowed to buy because, despite its good quality, the packaging was just too expensive for your shopping budget. Izuku stared at the items before reluctantly taking them and sighed. Why couldn't his teacher just throw a chair through a window and call it a day? Shota watched as his student took the items, seemingly resigned to his fate. And he accepted it a hell of a lot faster than the underground hero thought he would. Not that he's complaining, though, it would have been plenty inconvenient if Midoriya had refused the position. Not that he really had a choice in the matter, but arguing back and forth about something that could only end in one way would waste even more time. Simply put, it was illogical. So, Midoriya's eyes snapped back up to look at him. Good, he's already attentive. I said you would be documenting everything that happens while I'm principal, but that's pretty vague all things considered, and I imagine you'd want a more detailed description of what your job is this week. Midoriya nodded so fast it seemed like his head would fly off. Shota delved into an explanation. Nizu has stated that although this position is temporary, I will be given all the powers he would have on a regular basis. Therefore, any changes I wanted to make with this school that I couldn't accomplish as a teacher is now available to me. You're not going to expel students from other classes, right? If Shota was that emotionally stable, he might have laughed at the pure seriousness in Midoriya's voice as he asked that question. But laughing would be as good as a no, and he's not so sure it's a no. That it most likely won't be necessary. They both knew that wasn't an actual answer, but neither chose to acknowledge it. A smart move on his student's part. Then, what changes are you gonna make? Shota gave a sadistic smile and immediately noticed how the curiosity pooling in Midoriya's green eyes quickly contorted into fearful anxiety of what was to come. The gruff teacher couldn't blame him. That's where you come in. Even more anxiety. I already have a few ideas in mind about what's wrong with UA, but I'm about 80% sure that you do too. The green-haired child began waving his arms around, attempting to cover his face like Shota and the rest of the class had seen him do so many times before. It's a common occurrence to see Midoriya panicked about something. What do you mean? The kid yelled out, way too loud for this time of day and making Shota cringe from the noise. There's nothing wrong with UA. It's amazing here. All Might is a teacher and alumni here. UA was named the #1 hero school in Japan in every ranking magazine and website, as well as Best Business Course, Support Course, General Education Course, Best Cafeteria Menu, B-. Shota held up, effectively silencing the chatterbox from spiraling into another rant. Yes, I'm well aware of the rankings UA has. But there are many factors pointing to the magazines being biased. Do you think any tabloid company would risk their reputation by stating that UA, the alma mater of the symbol of peace, is only second best? Midoriya looked down, deep in thought. Another good trait, he's taking this seriously. Exactly. And while UA is no doubt worthy of its prestigious title, there are still many things that can be improved. Don't you think that saying UA isn't at its current best will lead to the school receiving public backlash? Midoriya asked, concern clouding his features and bleeding into his voice. It's a possibility, but I sincerely doubt it. By acknowledging the school's flaws, we're showing that we're open to change. Shota assured him. Change? His student muttered. The underground hero gave him a weird look. Midoriya didn't sound thoughtful when he said that, rather a bit dreamy, if that's the right word. And Shota wondered what kind of experiences the kid must have had to say it with that kind of emotion. Midoriya quickly schooled his expression before continuing. So I write down changes that this school could make? Absolutely no limits. Once again, Shota gave him a weird look but nodded nonetheless. Unfortunately, being principal doesn't automatically make me omnipotent, so I'll still have to discuss these decisions with the staff and school board. It is during those meetings that your note-taking will come in handy. Midoriya nodded, determination shining in his eyes. Much like a court clerk, you'll be taking record of everything everyone says, as well as any other observations you notice about their behavior. It may seem excessive but documenting their dialogue and reactions can help us see who agrees and disagrees, as well as giving clues as to why they feel that way. After that, we can decide the best courses of action to change their minds or change the decision in general to make a compromise of sorts. This will prevent any hypothetical backlash or outrage that will arise within the hero community. The bush-haired student finished, caught up in his own mind, and oblivious to the sleepy man in front of him. Against his will, a steady stream of pride flowed into Shota's chest for his student. He knew Midoriya's analytical abilities were exceptional for his age group. They had to be, judging by his rapid note-taking in almost every class, but this. It made him wonder why the kid didn't show this side of himself in heroics training. It was obvious to Shota that Midoriya was trying to replicate All Might's fighting style, but in reality, they were nothing alike. Of course, on the outside, they seemed like carbon copies of each other. They both had that unwavering heroic spirit, they both smiled like the sun even during the hardest of times. And they both had no sense of self-preservation. Hell, they even had similar quirks. But while All Might chose to power through things with brute force, Midoriya had the ability to devise a flawless plan and analyze every possibility for the best outcome. He just wished he would use that ability. Maybe this whole secretary thing would help him realize that. Precisely, the teacher said instead. Now, once the job starts, we won't have another break for a long time. So is there anything else you need to have with you before we get started? Yeah. I'll take my payment in the form of packs of fancy mechanical pencils. Midoriya started, causing his teacher to quirk an eyebrow in amusement. I'm also gonna need, for more notebooks. Aizawa grinned sadistically. And for a second, the twitch of Midoriya's lips suggested he wanted to, too. Interesting. This was gonna be one hell of a week. Shota gripped the mug of coffee with both hands, relishing in its warmth and breathing in the fumes of the steaming black coffee. One upside of being principal? Access to Nizu's private kitchen, equipped with the best tea bags and coffee grounds known to man. The black-haired man wasn't so bold as to use any of Nizu's antique china, but raiding his cupboards felt like a big enough power move to satisfy him. Sure, Nizu would kick him out of his office next Monday, but he'll be mad if he doesn't take the drinks with him. He'll enjoy it while it lasts. And it seems as if Midoriya had the same idea. From where he was currently seated behind Nizu's desk, he could see the child scribbling down all the brand names he saw to reference at a later date. Shota will have to ask him for a copy of that list later on. Shota. He turned around to face the speaker, and was met with the sight of Namuri, wrapping the end of her WP around her fingers before unraveling them and repeating the process. I'm really digging the whole blooming romance you got going on between you and your caffeine addiction he scowled, but in case you haven't noticed, I still don't know why I'm in here. No, he was absolutely aware of that, this was simply another power move. And maybe, just maybe, if this was him taking his petty grievances against Nizu out on his coworkers, well then. Nobody had to know. Nonetheless, Shota straightened in his seat and reluctantly placed down his mug, diving into the conversation. "It's about the first new course of action," he stated simply. "I've decided to finally change the design of UA's entrance exam. That way, applicants with mental quirks or just less flashy quirks, in general, have an equal chance at passing as the others do." "Or the quirkless," Midoriya muttered to himself, still jotting everything down, and Shota froze as he was the only one who heard the little comment. Quirkless kids? In this day and age? It was unlikely, but not entirely impossible. Most of the quirkless population was made up of senior citizens, the ones born before the rising of quirks, so most people brushed them aside. It was cruel, in Shota's opinion, but that's beside the point. Quirkless kids had essentially the same chance of becoming heroes as quirked children did, if not a little disadvantaged. It was fine, though, nothing that couldn't be solved with intense training and some support items. That's how it was for Shota. After all, he basically fought quirkless against his opponents. The only thing his erasure quirk did was level the playing field, mutant quirks excluded, so yeah, he agreed, this entrance exam leveled the playing field for all types of quirks, and those born without them. Oh, Namuri breathed out, a little shocked at how fast he was moving forward with this project. Okay then. But why are you only telling me this? Why not tell the whole staff? You're going to need their assistance and majority vote if you want the school board to even consider whatever your plan is. Shota smirked and snapped his fingers to point to his right, where Midoriya was currently perching on the kitchen countertop. Namuri flinched. Did she seriously not notice him sitting there this whole time? Midoriya lifted his head out of his notebook for the first time in ages and delved into a detailed explanation. You're one of the only teachers besides Aizawa-sensei that could properly advocate for this change. Your quirk, Somnambulist, enables you to release a purple substance that has effects similar to that of sleeping gas, except without the toxic chemical properties. It causes anyone who inhales it to pass out for a specific PRD of time, working better on males than it does on females for unknown reasons. And, of course, absolutely useless on robots. You, much like Aizawa-sensei, require a human target to properly use your quirk. This is why had you taken the initial entrance exam, you would have failed. The only reason Aizawa-sensei was admitted into the hero course was that he came in first place during the sports festival of his first year. And according to school records, he was the only general education student able to do so in the history of UA. Meaning that unless you tore apart the robots with your bare hands or got a ridiculously high amount of rescue points like me, you got in through recommendation. You didn't even bother with the robots because you knew it would be a meaningless fight. Therefore, you know firsthand how unfair the entrance exam is and can attest to this new course of action. Of course, Aizawa-sensei could, too, but everyone already knows his opinions on the matter. Another jab from him at the test design wouldn't even make a dent. That's why you need to be the one to do it. Ah yes, another pro of being principal. He has a secretary like Midoriya to thoroughly explain things instead of waste time doing it himself. Namuri was gobsmacked, jaw hanging open and so wide it could catch flies. Clearly, she had underestimated how much the bushy-haired child could ramble, which was a lot. Although, using the term ramble made it sound like pointless chatter with no end goal in mind, which this was anything but. It was a focused, thought-out, and sophisticated report. How did you dash? Namuri stuttered, incredulousness lacing her tone, and Aizawa held up a hand to interrupt her. Nope. He's not done yet. Shota smirked even wider at Namuri's pain. God, this was more entertaining than watching All Might use flashcards when presenting a lesson. Finally finding an opening, Midoriya continued. Judging by the videos I found online of you fighting, a frequent technique you use against villains is drawing them in with faux friendliness and then attacking them with your quirk and support weapons once they're within range. You convincing the other teachers of UA would essentially be the same thing. Midoriya hesitated for a second before continuing. Except they aren't villains and you won't be physically attacking them. Well, Shota butted in, desperate times call for desperate measures. So just put attacking them in the gray area between psychological warfare and physical harassment. At first, Midoriya looked like he wanted to protest, but after a second of consideration, seemed like he actually agreed. And Shota didn't know whether he should be concerned or proud, perhaps both. Namuri gave them both a look that screamed, "What the actual hell is wrong with you people?" But his green-haired student was already explaining the second portion of the plan. In a sense, this could be considered psychological warfare. Shota vaguely heard a soft, "I can't handle two of them in the same building," come from the purple-haired woman, but chose not to address it, for the time being, trusting that Midoriya would write it down for him. But I think a better and much lighter term would be just a slight emotional manipulation of peers. Midoriya cheered. A friendly smile and welcoming eyes on his face that didn't quite match his words. Shota found himself holding back a snort at the kid's antics and what he considered better and lighter. If anything, he made it sound way worse. "Hey, wait a second, since when does he have the urge to snort at things?" Midoriya's eyes suddenly took on a new look, darkening and contorting into something a tad bit feral. Once again, Shota found himself intrigued at the immediate change in personality. And once again, Namuri looked 5 seconds away from either having a mental breakdown or fleeing the country, whatever's more financially convenient. According to recent observations, your relationships with your coworkers have become fairly obvious. Your hero art history class takes place right before lunch, and you can usually be seen walking off with Pro Hero 13 holding your lunches when the bell rings. Therefore, I can safely assume that you two are close enough to share lunch breaks 2 to 3 times a week. The photos on your desk depict images of your high school years with both Aizawa-sensei and Mike-sensei, suggesting that the three of you have been friends since high school and have not broken the bond since. Vlad-sensei too, but at one time I saw you, Cementos and Ectoplasm having tea and holding 3 copies of the book of Mice and Men, suggesting you meet at regular times for a book club of sorts. Oh, and everyone can see that Snipe-sensei has a crush on you. Your responsibility would be to schedule regular meetings with those you have bonds with, a subtly but frequently mentioned topics that include the following. Midoriya took a deep breath of air, and suddenly it occurred to both teachers that the student hadn't taken a single breath during his other reports. The hell kind of lungs does this kid have? Quirk discrimination, childhood friends you used to know that had dreams of becoming heroes but didn't have the chance, tests, school board, the importance of democracy, robot sci-fi movies, wiring dash. How would I casually bring up wiring in a book club meeting? Namuri rasped out, looking worse for wear. Midoriya didn't even hesitate before responding. Spill some tea on your phone and loudly exclaim how you might have to get a new one because the liquid will mess up the wiring. Then complain about how if you could fix the wiring yourself, you would, but you aren't strong enough to rip apart that kind of advanced technology. Oh. Doing this repeatedly will guarantee that these thoughts will be stuck in their heads. That way, by the time Aizawa presents the new entrance exam design, they've essentially been buttered up and will be more open to it. They sat in silent anticipation for a few seconds before Midoriya finally realized what was going on and spoke up. "Oh, yeah, I'm done. That was a lot." The spiky-haired woman choked out hoarsely. "But sure, I think I could help out with that. And if you don't mind me asking, what exactly is the new plan?" Oh, Shota could answer this. "There's 2, whichever one works best is what we'll go with. The first one is making everyone fight robots, but permitting certain applicants to use support items, depending on their quirk status and the support item they chose. For example, a pipe or bow staff to mess up a robot's wiring and shut it down would be okay, but requesting the use of a flamethrower wouldn't be allowed. It might be absurd to suggest that a student would go so far as to bring that kind of lethal weapon to an exam, but judging by that handsome girl in Class 2H, it sounds like a pretty reasonable concern to him. The second one is once again keeping the robots, but giving applicants the option of requesting to fight a member of staff or third-year students, depending on their quirk status. It'd give them a chance to show either their exceptional combat abilities, the usefulness of their quirk on the job, or both. So, kind of like how students in other courses can use support items during the sports festival but hero students can't. It's just making up for their disadvantages in certain departments." Shota nodded, but Namuri still had something on her mind. "You know Vlad's gonna try his hardest to fight you on this thing, right? Done it before and he'll do it again. He's narrow-minded when it comes to these things. It's not going to be easy, or maybe even possible, to convince him otherwise." We have a plan, Shota and Midoriya said perfectly in sync, with the same intense determination on their faces and seriousness in their voice. And they did have a plan, one that involved a particular lavender-haired child that is currently transferring to the hero course and a mad inventor that could bring the world to its knees. And even if the plan fails and Vlad-sensei doesn't change his opinion on the matter, as long as you keep others from listening to him, it won't change a thing. Majority vote wins, after all, and in the end, he's basically useless. Midoriya stated while grinning, oblivious to how badly he just roasted Vlad. Shota found himself unable to hold back a fond smirk at that, which earned him a weird look from Nemuri. The R-rated hero looked back and forth between the new principal and his green-eyed secretary, an expression on her face that Shota couldn't manage to read. She must have been thinking of something pretty amusing, though, judging by the mischievous smile that left her face as quickly as it had appeared. Shota didn't know why, yet, but something about her suspicious smiles rubbed him the wrong way. Finally, Nemuri spoke. Is this a common occurrence with you, Shota? Do you influence your students to share your hate of Vlad King and make plans for his downfall? First off, I wouldn't call it influencing so much as bringing along a spiritual awakening. Second, yes, I do make plans for his downfall. And third, no, this was all him. So far it's the only proof I have that generations are mentally evolving as time passes. Shota stated with a straight face, causing Nemuri to let out a loud cackle. Midoriya just tilted his head, looking eerily similar to a confused puppy. Or rather, a confused kitten. The boy was a genius at analyzing everything and everyone until it came to himself. Nemuri cooed at the boy's obliviousness before standing up and heading to the door. But before she could fully step out, she turned around to say one more thing. By the way, Midoriya, your essay on Gothic architecture is due tomorrow. The child gave a firm nod. Also, Shota, you never gave me a limit to how far I could go when convincing Snipe. Therefore, all hypothetical lawsuits that come as a result of this psychological warfare now rest on your soldiers. Have a fun day, you two. Nemuri cooed at them after dropping that whole bombshell, walking out the door and moving to close it behind her. The last thing the R-rated heroine heard before the two's discussion became muffled was a boyish voice screaming. Slight emotional manipulation dash. So, there are two ways we could go about this. Izuku stared up at his teacher, hanging on every word. He may not have wanted to do this job in the beginning, but fortunately, there was a lot more strategic planning involved than he had originally thought. He supposed it would be good practice for his analysis skills, so he wasn't going to slack off. Not that he would have slacked off either way, but now was especially motivated not to. Not that he isn't always extremely motivated, but we could either do your plan or my plan. Take a pick. Right? He was supposed to be planning right now. He did find it kind of strange that Aizawa-sensei trusted him enough to let him pick the plan. This seemed like a really meaningful cause to his teacher, and he didn't want to risk ruining it. Might as well give it his all. Midoriya held his hand to his chin, deep in thought, and began to mumble. According to Midnight Sensei, Vlad Sensei has repeatedly shut down all your attempts at changing the entrance exam design, meaning that at some point he has already heard all of your pieces of evidence and reasonings and completely ignored them. In Izuku's opinion, it seemed greatly prejudiced, but it'd be rude to talk about his teacher, a pro-hero, that way. So he kept that little thought to himself and hoped that he'd never accidentally blurted it out to anyone. So it'd be a waste of time to try and start with your plan. I say we start with my plan, get him all freaked out with the drama, and then you start your statistical report during the actual vote. Izuku hesitated for a few seconds before continuing. Also, Shinso's already here and won't be happy about having to wait any longer. Aizawa gave a firm nod. Sounds about right. Feel free to get started then, but try not to break too many bones, or else Recovery Girl will have my head on a platter. Recovery Girl. That's another problem he'd been meaning to discuss. Once Vlad looks like he's at his lowest emotional point, you three can evacuate the area and pretend you're going back to the support lab or something. With that, Aizawa-sensei slipped into the shadows like an alley cat, disappearing from sight. Izuku shifted from side to side on his feet, the feeling of Mei's prototype red shoes against his skin grounding him to the situation. He tried hyping himself up, telling himself that there was no way he could possibly mess this up. After all, he'd gone over it like a million times in his head and had been planning it ever since Aizawa-sensei told him about Vlad's hard-headed opinions. Shinso had memorized his lines, Mei had already convinced Power Loader to not expel her for this, and Izuku was about 70% sure this wouldn't end in an explosion, which was pretty impressive given Mei's reputation. Ironically, the only other thing at stake here for Izuku was his reputation. Finally, as soon as the green-haired child saw the red of Vlad King's suit make its way around the corner, he took a deep breath and had only one thought on his mind. It's go time. Izuku kicked the heels of his red shoes together, just like Dorothy did from that really old Prequark movie, and watched in fascination as two jets emerged from the bottom. Pushing down his uneasiness, Izuku waited for his target to get into the perfect position before blasting off with enough speed and force to dent a wall. Not that he wants to, but something a few notches under that should be guaranteed to catch the duo's attention. Wait, duo? Izuku's eyes widened as he realized that there was another person standing beside Vlad King. Said person was much shorter and appeared to be wearing a Hero Corps school uniform. Said student also had vivid red eyes and ash blonde hair. Kacchan. But it was already too late to change his trajectory, and Izuku could only watch in horror as he collided with his hot-headed classmate, tumbling to the ground in a heap of tangled limbs. Kacchan spat, trying to get his mouth out of Izuku's obnoxiously curly hair. What the hell, Deku? Do you regularly shoot across hallways or something? You get excused from classes just to pull this dash. Oh my god, I am so sorry. Izuku yelled, waving his arms around in the familiar frantic motion that ended up accidentally whacking Kacchan in the face. Ah geez, today's the day he dies, huh? Tell his mom he loves her. Tell his dad he'd probably say the same if he knew where he was. Sorry for that too. Stop apologizing and just get off me, dumbass. Right. Izuku rolled off the angry blonde and onto his back, the first thing he sees when he looks up being Vlad's stunned face staring down at them. And that was the moment the green-haired child realized that he was still in the middle of a performance and that Shinso and Mei were still eagerly awaiting their cue to come in. See, he can't mess this up now. His friends are relying on him. Aizawa-sensei is relying on him. Quirkless kids everywhere are relying on him. So without thinking of the consequences, Izuku hid his face from Vlad and gave Kacchan the dirtiest glare he could. Like Aizawa-sensei said, desperate times call for desperate measures. Look, I'm really sorry for knocking you to the ground, but don't you dare get in my way. He growled out. Does he have a death wish or something? And since when does he growl at people? Luckily, it seemed like Kacchan was too shocked by his outburst at the moment to formulate a proper reply. Izuku jumped right back into his role. No. God please no. No. He screamed out in fake anguish. Kacchan was even more shocked now. It was a weird expression to see on the angry Pomeranian's face. Mito! A male voice called out, footsteps drawing closer. But Izuku didn't have to guess who it was. He already knew the voice belonged to a particular purple-eyed insomniac. He also didn't have to guess because he heard Kacchan grumble something along the lines of eyebags, so it could really only be one person. I thought Mei warned you to control the shoe settings before blasting off. Shinso, talk about acting skills. I did. Izuku squeaked out, feigning panicked confusion. But then it started sparking and by the time I realized it was malfunctioning I was already airborne. Technology is just difficult to handle. Sometimes. Shinso gave him a fake dead stare. Seriously? You got defeated by a hunk of metal? Shinso asked snarkily, and Izuku squawked in offense. To be honest, acting like this wasn't hard, considering this is the tone and actions they would normally do. Excuse you, it's not a hunk of metal that can be shut down just by tapping it. See where he's going with this? As he said to Midnight Sensei, you have to subtly put the ideas in your target's head. The jet was just one of its settings, it still has 3 more. Hell, one of them even shoots lasers. Okay, so, Izuku can't really tell if that's being subtle anymore. But judging by the thoughtful expression on Vlad's face, the technique was working. Imagine how badly I could have been hurt if I just randomly started hitting it midair, and in the end, it would have been a useless effort anyway. You have that superpower quirk, don't you? Why didn't you just use that to make a blast of air in the opposite direction and even out the force or something? Shinso asked. And bring it home. You expect me to make a blast in the hallway? I've already caused enough property damage, Shinso. I don't need any more of it. And besides, we aren't allowed to use our quirks outside of heroics class. So if you think about it, the tip of his mouth twitched, and he had to physically restrain himself from smirking. He's been holding back quite a lot of smirks this morning ever since he got the secretary job. Is it a coincidence? I'm basically quirkless. Silence. Complete silence. Kachin, who looked like he was just getting over the shock of nerdy little Deku growling at him, seemed to be thrown back into another spiraling crisis, probably confused as to why Izuku would bring up that chapter of his life. He didn't know why it was so shocking, though he may have one for all now, but it's not like that erases his past. Erases who he truly was at heart. Shinso didn't have as much restraint as Izuku did and was full-on grinning. And Vlad King. Oh boy. Vlad King was frozen, fingers, eyebrows, and nose twitching for some unknown reason. But he thinks he can speak for Aizawa-sensei and Shinso when he says he hopes it's regret and realization. But the trio wasn't done yet. It'd be suicide as a quirkless person, or just anyone without an offensive quirk. Yeah, he's really laying it on thick right now. To try and go up against a death machine piece of robotics. Why even bother? I see. A pink-haired girl with goggles and a belt full of tools bounded over to him and kneeled by his side. Not to check on him, though, but rather the prototype shoes. Huh, so my baby glitched out. She muttered, examining the sides. You don't say. Kachin gritted out. They all chose to ignore him, something that they would dearly pay for during their next meeting. I guess I could change up the design to make it more manageable for people, regardless of their quirk status. Vlad looked sick. Or maybe I could give you another device to shut the shoes down if it reacts this way again. Huh, a support item for a support item. Well, thanks for testing my babies out. May handed him his actual pair of red shoes and he quickly interchanged them for the ones on his feet, giving her the prototype back. Hopefully, he got to use it later, though it would be amazing to use once May figures out the logistics of it. For a few seconds they all stood in silence, Kachin surprisingly included. Although whether that's the result of a concussion, Izuku didn't know. He'll just enjoy it while it lasts. Finally, Shinso spoke up. I got to get to math. So, right? Aizawa said to evacuate once Vlad looked bad enough, which he definitely did. Izuku didn't want to be cruel, but this is just his job as a secretary. He has no other choice, and that's the only reason he went this extreme. Right? Hopefully. Izuku coughed. Yeah. I have, secretary stuff. So I'll see you guys later. Cool. I have to fix my babies anyway. Bye. May cheered, skipping off to class. Shinso soon followed, but with much less enthusiasm. Bye. Izuku spared none of them another glance and started speed walking away in the direction he knew Aizawa-sensei was hiding in. As soon they were sure nobody could see them, his teacher left the cold comfort of the shadows and stepped out into the open, cringing at the lights in his eyes before turning to Izuku. On a scale of 1 to 10, how uncomfortable did Vlad look? The underground hero asked bluntly. Although, something about his teacher's slightly trembling lips suggested he was on the verge of laughing at something. But it most likely just Izuku imagining things again, 'cause Aizawa-sensei never laughs. At first he was just shocked, so like a 2, but then when Shinso and I mentioned metal and technology, he rose to a weird, and then after mentioning malfunctions, lasers, and property damage he was a but as soon as I said quirkless he just shot up to A, and then May laid it on thick with the topic of remodeling and support items, so he's a solid 9 by now. He rambled excitedly, happy to know that his slight emotional manipulation was paying off. But also slightly scared. Great. Wow, Aizawa-sensei said great. Usually, it's an adequate, or okay, or that could be considered logical, but never a great. Izuku started bouncing on his feet even more, but his teacher narrowed his eyes. Why are you more fidgety than usual? I'd pass it off as giddiness, but you keep looking towards the hallway. You waiting for something? CD, he noticed. The tired hero narrowed his eyes even more as the boy froze. Someone. Izuku twiddled his fingers looking down. I knocked Kachin to the floor when I was blasting in the hallway and I'm like 60% sure he has a concussion. But if I'm wrong, then I have about 10 seconds before he dash. Du. Izuku sprinted to Nizu's office and didn't look back. Aizawa-sensei didn't need his help getting back anyway and they had a meeting to attend. He'd rather get a pay decrease in his pens than deal with his explosive rival today. Shota was once again reunited with his mug of coffee, except over 4 hours had passed and the warmth was long gone, replaced with an icy chill that replicated the temperature of his heart. But it was fine, at least he wasn't the only one suffering right now. Shota gave a sly smile as he looked in Vlad's direction. The man was an absolute mess. Now, Shota doesn't laugh. He doesn't. The last time he wholeheartedly laughed was during his second year of UA, and ever since then, nothing. The most he's been seen doing is a mischievous grin at someone else's suffering. But today, my God, he didn't laugh, because he's a pro hero and has learned about self-restraint for 3 years straight, but it was one hell of a close call. Any more of that incredibly scripted performance and Shota might have ruined his cold-hearted emo reputation. He'd be lying if he said it wasn't at least a bit entertaining to watch Midoriya and his ragtag group of friends give Vlad a run for his money. Even now the hero looked a bit green. Vaguely, Aizawa felt like he was influencing the next generation, sharing his wise knowledge with them about the world. But in this case, it's not the world so much as it is the concept of knocking some sense into that blood-wielding knucklehead. He'll pass down his methods of psychological warfare, or as Midoriya likes to call it, a slight emotional manipulation, just like Nizu did for him. Why does this sound like some demented family tree? Shota blinked hard, snapping himself out of his thoughts. Now was not the time to be thinking of pointless nonsense, it was illogical and he had better things to do right now. Better things such as starting the UA staff meeting, which they were currently waiting on Snipe and Midnight. He doesn't want to know why it was specifically them and only them alone, to start. Shota lifted his head and gave a withering look to the 10 pairs of eyes that currently rested on him. Or rather, 9. All Might's attention was focused elsewhere. Young Aizawa, he fixed his intense stare on All Might, enjoying the way the man seemed to flinch under it. If you don't me asking, why is young Midoriya here in the faculty room instead of English with the rest of the class 2A? Right. No one besides himself, Nizu, Midnight, and Class 2A knew about Midoriya's position. He would have told them but he was already running on less sleep than usual and didn't have the time nor energy to worry about others. Now is as good a time as any, he supposes. Nizu and I agreed to make Midoriya my secretary for the week while I'm principal, to document observations and events, and assist with planning. He stated simply. Right. Midoriya exclaimed while slightly pumping up his fist, as excited as ever. If he listened really closely, he could everyone in the room coo a quick, under their breaths. Typical, the green-haired child had the entire school wrapped around his finger. Not that Shota's complaining, though, they had some pretty solid reasoning. The kid was practically a ray of sunshine. Secretary? Wait, does that mean I can give you my coffee order? Power Loader asked, surprisingly serious. What kind of question was that? Midoriya's job is to give professional reports, not be somebody's gopher. Get it yourself. Shota said at the same time Midoriya enthusiastically asked, cream and sugar? You what? Shota whirled around in his chair to give Midoriya, who was currently sitting in the smaller chair next to him, an incredulous look. The kid in question returned the look with a confused one of his own. Did the kid actually think it was his job to run errands for the other teachers? Shota just silently shook his head and watched as his student made an O shape with his mouth, nodding in understanding before flipping to a random page in his book and scribbling something out. Shota doesn't even want to know what he had written down. The gruff man gave another hard blink to snap himself out of it before facing his coworkers again and was surprised to see them looking back and forth between himself and the kid while narrowing their eyes. Well, actually, just like last time, All Might was ever the outlier, having a fond expression on his face. It's the same thing Nemuri did in his office when he and the kid were going back and forth about the warfare plan. Is there something he's not understanding, or? The faculty room door burst open, drawing everyone's attention off of the principal and secretary duo, much to the underground hero's relief. Skipping through the door like some love-struck schoolgirl, Snipe took his seat, blushing all the way. And right on his heels was none other than Nemuri, a sly smirk on her face as she took the chair right of Shota's. He glowered at her and whispered, "The hell did you do to Snipe?" Midoriya once again jotted his every word down, and this might have been the one conversation Shota wished he wasn't so diligent about. "Oh, you know," she waved him off, "a little wine and dine, the regular. You realize it's only 1:30 in the afternoon, right?" She gave him a sharp look. "Hey, anything in or near the PM area is fair game." He rolled his eyes and did the same snapping/pointing gesture to Midoriya as he did that morning. Studies show that although drinking alcoholic beverages may delay the occurrence of a hangover, it's almost guaranteed that you will experience the aftereffects later on, perhaps even during your drive home. And if you had alcohol the night before, then even the slightest amount could put you over your limit, possibly causing a car accident. Doctors can also attest to the fact that people who drink early in the day, combined with an empty stomach, are more likely to develop alcoholic liver disease and alcoholic dementia. Midoriya finished reading from his book and looked up at both of them. With big green eyes, practically begging to be validated for the report. Shota gave an approving nod in return, watching out of the corner of his eye as the kid shared a victorious smile with himself. Nemuri stared for a second before sighing. "I don't know whether I should be impressed that you just have that written in your notebook already for unknown purposes or very, very concerned." "Both," Shota and the bushy-haired child said in sync. What is it with them and speaking in sync? It's only been a few hours since Midoriya became his secretary. Nemuri was the one to roll her eyes this time. Now I have to deal with 3 sadistic geniuses. She muttered under her breath. But whatever, it paid off in the end, didn't it? That psychological warfare dash. Slight emotional manipulation dash. Midoriya's teacher breathed out a laugh. Wait, what? Worked like a charm. We got Snipe's vote in the bag. She whispered, giving a playful slap to Shota's arm before crossing her arms behind her head and leaning back to relax in her chair. Shota decided to turn a blind eye to whatever she and his coworker did and just move on with the meeting. "So," he addressed the room, "I'll just cut to the chase. The first course of action I'm making as a temporary principal is the remodeling of the Hero Course entrance exam." An eruption of voices broke out and he activated his quirk, flashing them a glare with his scorching red eyes. The favoritism towards flashy, physical quirks has become prominent in hero society, and what kind of hero school would we be if we didn't fight back against that kind of bias? Damned Aizawa, kicking off your entrance exam advocacy on the very first day of being principal. Power Loader bumped his fist against his heart 2 times. Respect. Maybe Senpai starting this project today was destiny. 13 cheered, animatedly moving their hands as they talked. I don't know about you guys, but I've been thinking about robots and quirk discrimination all day. Reminded me a lot of my childhood back when my classmates got freaked out by the fact that I didn't have a physical body. I think it's a sign. Yes, quirk discrimination, something Shota can definitely relate to. If he took a nap for every time someone called him a villain just by seeing his quirk in action, his eye bags might have been a much lighter shade of purple. Agreements rose up from all around the table, all speaking of the similar thoughts they'd had throughout the day. Shota, Nemuri, and Midoriya shared a small smirk at that. But it left their faces just as quickly as it had come once Vlad spoke up. "You're kidding," Vlad said slowly, clearly trying and failing to keep the shock out of his voice at his coworker's words. "Right." Shota tilted his head. "Whatever suggested that?" The underground hero prodded, and everyone soon came to realize that this was the calm before the storm. It's just that, Vlad sputtered, ears tinging red in a mixture of both embarrassment and frustration. "There's no way you could just change the entrance exam. Fighting the robots is practically a tradition at UA. We've done it for years. Just because it's been done for years doesn't make it right. It can always be improved." Shota rebutted. Vlad was getting on his nerves with his narrow-minded statements. Do you even have a plan for this? Or is this just another half-butted project with no real depth behind I-? Midoriya, the tired but more annoyed teacher, snapped his fingers. If you would. Midoriya flipped to a page in his notebook, his second notebook, might he add, and pulled out 11 sheets of paper, distributing them among the staff. They were the remodeling options that they discussed with Namuri a few hours ago, only way more detailed. Aizawa-sensei has drafted 2 possible plans for the new hero course entrance exam, both of which have been reviewed and approved by the Fundamentals of Law teacher in UA's business course, Hyun-gong, who, by the way, has several PhDs and has been praised by Nizu himself for her published books. The sheets you have been given include the summary of the plans, how they would work, why they would work, and the funds needed to accomplish either of them. After emailing UA's accounting and finance department, we were informed that Nizu had been filtering 5% of the school's annual donations into a bank account that has increased with 1.5% interest every quarter for the past 50 years as a failsafe of sorts. There's more than enough money to do either of these plans without even making a 0.01% dent in the net worth. All you guys need to do is vote on a plan, and it'll be mailed to the school board and Hero Commission right away for approval. Shota swore he could hear a pin drop from how quiet the faculty room was after Midoriya's lengthy report. He doesn't know what they were expecting his bright-eyed student to say, but he knows that no matter what standards they held for the kid, he surpassed it. He's been doing that a lot, lately, and Shota's disappointed in himself for only noticing now in his second year. "Hey, kid," a tight voice called out, and the underground hero saw Midoriya lift his head out of his notebook to face the speaker, which just happened to be Vlad King. Shota swears to God if he says anything rude to his student. "Why are you doing this?" His student looked taken aback at the question, letting out a quiet, "Huh." I asked, "Why are you doing this? Is it for extra credit or something?" It has to be because there's no other logical explanation for why you helped develop this silly project. How dare the word logical fall from his lips? You love UA, don't you? You like the way we operate here. So why fight against it? WL, it's not really fighting, is it? Oh no. Shota could physically watch as Midoriya retreated back into his shell, self-confidence being doubted and questioned from Vlad's tone of voice. Isn't it more like improving? For the G greater good dash, the blood-bending pro-hero cut him off. Greater good? UA already is the greater good. There are no flaws and nothing needs to be improved upon or changed. We have a system here and the system always works. It worked for you, didn't it? Shota's eyes darkened. He didn't like where this was going, but if he stopped Vlad now it'd make him seem like he can't handle opposing views. You took the entrance exam and got in fair and square, and now you're one of the star students. That's good enough proof that dash. But how many potential star students were turned away because of the horrible design of the entrance exam? Say there was a student who had a touch activation color-changing quirk, it'd be perfect for underground heroics and concealing her identity. But how is she going to get the teachers to see that when she isn't able to show her usefulness? You think making the robot blue is going to help anyone? And even if she had martial arts training, no one should expect her to be able to kick the head off a robot. Namuri snorted at Vlad's scandalized expression but quickly passed it off as a cough, probably fooling everyone but Shota. Midoriya hadn't even said it in a rude way, just stated it as facts, which it was. And maybe that's what made it so important, because it wasn't just about his emotions anymore. Fine. But he sounds like a whiny child. But so what if it's good for concealing identities? If her quirk isn't suited for combat, then she shouldn't be a hero. Does he even realize there are people around him with quirks just like the ones he's describing, the ones that aren't suited for combat? You, on the other hand, have a quirk that's perfect for heroics. You don't need to worry about others because if they really wanted to be a hero, they would do it by themselves. So why even consider them? Meddling in matters that don't concern you is what makes a true hero. I'm helping this project move forward so others don't have to go through the same struggle that Midoriya paused, seeming as if he just became aware of how loud his voice was getting, not that Shota or anyone else here would blame him. Vlad King can't seem to form one sentence without sounding like a bigot. But what exactly did his student mean by the same struggle? Same as who? Shota promised himself that he'd find out later. The population of people with mental quirks, quirks considered villainous, or no quirk at all have had to face more obstacles than you or anyone else could possibly know about. They don't have the resources or support to become a hero by themselves, which is all the more reason to make these changes. Shota wanted to get up out of his seat and applaud the kid, and he's sure everyone else here did too. Well, except Vlad, that is. He just looked embarrassed beyond repair. He had asked Midoriya if this was some extra credit project, and even if it really wasn't, there's nothing holding the proud teacher back from doing so anyway. Shota was already flashing him a wicked smirk and preparing to start the vote when suddenly everyone at the table realized something. Midoriya wasn't finished. It wasn't that he had any else to tell them, he'd said enough for everyone to know that he had won the debate. But if there's one more thing they all know, it's that actions speak louder than words. And Midoriya must have known that, too, since for the first time ever, the kid leveled his eyes on Vlad's and glared. That's right, UA's resident sunshine child just glared at Class 2B's homeroom teacher, a pro hero. Everyone knew at the beginning of the debate that it was the calm before the storm, but they never expected Midoriya to be the storm. And it wasn't some pathetic dirty look you'd give to your friends when they said you off. This was the type of glare you'd give to your enemy. The type of glare a hero would give a villain. A searing pressure filled the room as venomous green eyes seemed to glow and crackle like lightning, waiting to strike its next victim the second they make a single sound. In this case, that victim was Vlad King, who wilted under the stare and tried to hide a gulp. And that's when it struck Shota that the boy beside him was no longer Midoriya Izuku, it was someone else. Something else. It was a hero. It was Deku. Then, almost like it had never happened, the pressure was gone. His eyes faded back to their usual forest green. The lightning had receded back into the soft clouds, replaced by a striking rainbow. And most importantly, the Deku persona was gone, leaving the Midoriya Izuku they all know and love in its wake. The green-haired child, as if he was oblivious to the situation, gave a cheery, kind smile and clapped his hands together. It's voting time. In the end, much to Shota's delight, or as delighted as someone that tired could be, the plan allowing applicants to request to fight a UA student or member of staff as the physical entrance exam had come out on top. And it was a unanimous vote. Shota leaned against Hisashi's car as he waited for the loud blonde to finish grading the last of Class 2C's assignments. His friend, not that he'd ever say it out loud, had offered to drive him to his apartment for today. And Shota, ever the minimalist, accepted, knowing that he would take any opportunity he could to save money on public transportation. The underground hero sighed while thinking over recent events. Today had been a productive day, a good day. Maybe even great. He couldn't describe what the light feeling in his chest was, but if he had to take an educated guess, he'd say it was content. He'd been trying to get one of these remodeling plans approved ever since he accepted Nisa's teaching position at UA, but every single time he'd been shut down. Now, on his first day as temporary principal, he was able to erase years of struggling in the span of just 6 hours. Is this what it was like to be in Nizu's position? Knowing that because of your superior status, the school, and possibly the future of Hero Society was at your mercy? It's like he was the puppeteer of this complex performance, the pillars of society attached to his fingertips by strings that he can fully manipulate, not that he would. And he could see why so many people in this corrupt world craved so much power for themselves, not that he'd ever be that selfish. But still, he wouldn't mind living life like this for more than a week. And he could honestly say that he was excited for whatever new changes tomorrow would bring. He could also honestly say that the same applied for having Midoriya as his secretary for more than a week too. He turned his head to see the green-haired child in question still by the front steps of the school, jumping up and down as he chattered away, no doubt relaying his experiences as a secretary today to his friends. Shota then observed how Midoriya gradually stopped his jumping as his hand was slowly brought up to his chin and his mouth started moving a mile a minute, not even pausing to take a breath. The teacher, or he guessed principal, for now, looked away from the quartet of friends as he felt something fond shine through his chest, just like it had this morning when he had first pulled the kid out of class to assist him in planning. It was unfamiliar but in no way unwelcomed. Now was the prime time in Shota's life to experience new things, and he guessed that applied to emotions too. But he immediately snapped out of his trance the moment a pair of deep red sneakers entered his view, and Shota lifted his eyes from the ground to see Midoriya standing in front of him, acting unusually fidgety. "Problem child," the gruff man greeted. "Do you need something?" "Aizawa-sensei." "Hi. I was just wondering." Midoriya hesitated for a few seconds before continuing. "Vlad King isn't going to report me to Nezuonsi Kames back, right?" What? "You're gonna have to slow down a bit for me to understand." "Whatever you just said," Shota tells him, and Midoriya fidgets for a few more seconds before regaining, sort of, his confidence. "Vlad King isn't going to report me to Nizu for what I did once he comes back and try to expel me. Right?" "Shota, don't do it. Don't you dare." He snorted. Just once. And to think a single sound from his throat was enough to scare the living daylights out of his student, judging by how Midoriya's eyes widened and he started fidgeting even more. "No, problem child, he's not going to expel you. Mostly because I'm the only teacher Nizu gave that power to, and because he's too terrified of either of us to try that." Midoriya squeaked. Why would he be terrified of me? Is he joking?" Shota gave him an incredulous look. "Your glare lasted 5 seconds and you still managed to put the fear of God into him. Looked like he was on the verge of shitting his breathes." Shota stated amusedly he wishes he had a camera to immortalize that moment. "Oh!" Midoriya exclaimed, surprise clear in his face and voice as he broke out into a smile. "So it worked." He whipped out his notebook and scribbling something down. Except it wasn't any of the notebooks Shota gave him, but rather something called Hero Analysis Notebook Number 14. So this was the one he was always hunching over in class. Shota had seen the way his classmates reacted to it. Uraraka tried to get as far away as possible and Bakugo attempts to blow it up, but he's never actually seen what's inside. It must be pretty damn detailed if Midoriya is writing it, though. But that's not important. "It worked?" Shota asked once the boy lifted his head. "What worked?" "There are lots of people that use glaring as an intimidation technique during battle or in an interrogation. Endeavor, Bakugo, Mirko, and Todoroki are the ones I've seen the most. It's a useful skill to have, so I figured I should try my hand at replicating it from a person I know." Midoriya explained, animatedly moving his hands around as he explained. "Is this person Bakugo?" Bakugo did glare a lot, and it would make sense if Midoriya took inspiration from him. But it still seemed wrong in a way. Whenever Bakugo glared, it just got people to flinch and back off. When Midoriya glared, "HM? Oh nah." Midoriya waved his guess off before replying. "I learned it from my dad. He did it a lot when I was little, and the first time I glared, my mom said it must have run in the family genes." Midoriya cheerfully recounted. Interesting." Midoriya agreed, rapidly nodding his head. And that's when Shota had a not-so-moral idea. If you want to collect data about the way people react to your glare, you should try it on classmates and compare results. Start with Bakugo. Should he feel bad? Maybe. Does he? God, no. The green-haired child looked at him like he'd just given him the answers of the universe and wrote it all down, mumbling the whole way. And it was only when the kid realized that Shinso was calling for him that he packed up his book and yelled a quick, "Bye," at Shota, sprinting away to the lilac-haired boy and disappearing out the gates. Eventually, Hizashi came skipping towards him with a greeting and unlocked the car, letting Shota get in, but Shota was still deep in thought. Midoriya's father? He must be one terrifying man. Izuku stared at his notebook, the one he was still writing in, by the way. Aizawa-sensei wanted him to write down all the problems he could find with UA, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately now, there was quite a lot. It's going to be a bit of a challenge to accomplish these before next Monday, but if they worked hard, he's sure they could do it. His teacher plopping down into Nizu's, or is it his now, lush leather chair and propping his feet up on the desk snapped Izuku out of his inspirational thought process. The gruff man took one look at the boy's notebook and sighed, but something about the way he did it made him sound almost fond. But that couldn't be right? Why would his teacher ever be happy about more work? And yesterday Izuku swore he'd heard the man snort at something he had said, But his teacher never laughs, either. It's only been a day and Aizawa-sensei is already acting much differently than usual. Although to be fair, Izuku could be considered to be the exact same. He growled at Kachin, even glared at him today even though it was purely for scientific purposes, and he called out a teacher for his stupidity. Overall, he doesn't know how he's alive right now. Or dead. But it was a welcome enough change. What's wrong with a little more confidence? He was going to need it if he wanted to be the new symbol of peace. Yeah, it was to be the symbol of peace. When I said not to hold back on UA's list of issues, I didn't think you'd go that far. Aizawa-sensei said, emphasizing his words, "How many's on there? 20? 30? 38. His teacher let out a long whistle and Izuku immediately backtracked, flushing in embarrassment and waving his arms around. I mean, of course they're all, really minor. Just stuff I've noticed during my time here, but then again that isn't a lot. Only 1.5 years, I'm not even a third year yet. These probably won't change much around here, anyway. Sorry about that, I think I got a little too caught up in the smaller things for the greater good. I should have known it was just an expression and not meant to be taken seriously. Midoriya, his teacher cut in sternly, and Izuku halted in the middle of his rambling. No problem is too small when it comes to you, everything here matters. And knowing you, it'll probably change a lot. Izuku didn't entirely know what his teacher made by that, but it didn't sound like an insult, so he stayed silent. It's better we handle it now than watch it snowball and blow up in our faces later. Although Izuku was still a little unsure, he nodded. If his teacher chose to acknowledge everything he wrote down, then that must mean it had some value to it, right? He hoped so. So, Izuku started quietly, still confused as to how he was supposed to react to the encouragement? Praise? He didn't know what it was, but it certainly couldn't be that. His teacher rarely ever bluntly praises people. Sports festival for general education or connections? Both. If I have to meet with Power Loader, I'd rather we get it all done at once instead of dragging it out to 2 meetings. Plus, there's another problem you didn't write down yet about the sports festival that I plan on having another vote for. Wow, 3 changes at once, and he thought yesterday was a lot. He's not complaining, though. More changes equal more plans, and by God does he like making plans. Especially since it appears that Aizawa-sensei gave him permission to do more slight emotional manipulation. Although, when his teacher said those exact words, he started holding back laughter again. And Izuku doesn't know if he should be worried about why he's laughing at the term or the fact that he's laughing in general. Wait, Izuku muttered, what's the second vote for? Shota stared at the fresh pot of coffee, once again drawn to the deep pool of bitter liquid that would scorch his tongue as he drank from his mug. Except this time, there were 2 mugs. One was white and filled with plain black coffee, and the other was exactly the same if you ignore the countless sugar packets dumped in and the way too much cream. By now, one can probably guess which belonged to Midoriya. He sat in Nisa's chair, just like he had during his meeting with Namuri yesterday, as Midoriya sat in the smaller chair on the left side of the desk. The sound of the boy's unending scribbling in his notebook could have lulled him to sleep, and for a second, he almost forgot the real reason they were in here. Come on, Aizawa, the pot's right there. Power Loader whined, gesturing toward the sacred object as he sat parallel to Shota. Can I please just pour myself 1 cup? Just 1. The pro-hero was practically begging at this point, and while Midoriya might have shown sympathy, Shota has none. Where was that pour myself attitude yesterday when you asked my secretary to get you coffee? He heard Midoriya choke on his drink. Power Loader, known to the rest of the staff as Majima, deflated and slumped in his seat. Shota smirked, serves him right for being an ignorant, but even if his green-haired student hadn't been offended, it sure as hell wasn't right, and the grumpy man wasn't going to let those kinds of questions pass as long as he had something to say about it. Precisely. Fine. But can you at least tell me why you called me here? 'Cause I have a feeling it wasn't just to call me out on the coffee comment. Majima huffed but still looked a little nervous. Once again good. Yesterday it was Kayama and today it's me. Are you planning on singling one of us out every morning for the next week? Because that's what it's starting to look like. No, he wasn't. But if that's what the others were thinking, then he wasn't going to step in, intimidation techniques weren't limited to just glaring after all. Shota quirked an eyebrow in interest. He should probably tell Midoriya to write that down later, as well as give him a few more examples of intimidation to try out. Not only would it be helpful for the kid's future career as a pro hero, but it would be amusing as hell. And he knew the boy would listen to him, too. During Class 2A's homeroom this morning, he'd walked in only to see the entire room stuck in chilling silence, the only sound coming from his forest-eyed student as he happily scribbled in his notebook with a smile. Every other one of his students was pale as a sheet of paper and had the most haunted looks on their faces. While it may have been a confusing sight to everyone else, it took Shota only 3 seconds to understand what had occurred. Midoriya had listened to his advice and ran a few more trials to test out his glaring skills, no doubt getting his ideal reaction results. And that's not even the best part. No, it was Bakugo that really topped it off. Shota isn't one to be petty if he doesn't have a reason, so thank God he had a reason. Don't get him wrong, it's nothing personal, but he's not the one that gets yelled at every day just for speaking by a blonde with anger issues. He should really discuss that issue later on. That's Midoriya. And everyone knows that Midoriya isn't one to hold a grudge, let alone take action because of it, although yesterday's interaction with Vlad had him questioning that fact, but the kid's little rivalry has gone too far. It would do more harm than good for Shota to step in himself, so all he did was give his oblivious student a step in the right, or he guessed petty, direction. He thought it would teach him a valuable lesson about picking and choosing his battles. And my God, it absolutely did. Bakugo looked like he had seen a ghost, in by far the worst shape among his classmates. Opening and closing his mouth, fingers shaking as he pointed to Midoriya, then himself, then Midoriya, then himself, and then just repeated that entire process all over again. Kirishima tried to comfort him, but there wasn't much he could do when he was just as scared. It made him wish he was there to see it all go down, but he guessed he could settle for this. And besides, after the voting process yesterday, he'd realized that Nizu planted security cameras in almost every office and classroom, so now he could just make the security feed of Midoriya his screensaver and the audio of Vlad getting roasted his ringtone. It was the best morning he'd had in a while. But back to the conversation. It's about our dash. Majima lifted his eyebrows at the word "or" for some reason, and Shota suddenly felt like he was the confused one in this room now. Second course of action. Damn, Aizawa. Starting your second project already? Majima lifted his fist to his chest and opened his mouth, ready to speak, but Shota cut him off before he could utter a single word. Respect. I know. The underground hero rolled his eyes at his co-worker's antics. It was Kirishima's manly situation all over again, and he'll be dead if he has to deal with 2 of them. Not to mention Tetsu. What does it have to do with me specifically, though? The plan, or I guess plans, there's multiple, directly affects the support course students as well as your job. So dash, Shota stopped short as he saw Majima wearing a fearful expression on his face. What? Are you firing me? Jesus Christ. No, Majima, I'm not going to fire you. The hell did you get that idea from? Nizu might have given him the go-ahead to teach his class as he pleased and expel who he saw fit, but that sure as hell didn't apply to his co-workers. And besides, Shota sticks to his word, he won't be petty if he doesn't have a reason to be. Nizu gave you complete power as principal, you expelled your entire class 2 years ago. Last week I spilled coffee on your sleeping bag and didn't wash it out dash. That was you. And you and your secretary destroyed Vlad yesterday and made Midnight walk out of this office looking like death itself. You two are practically bulldozing through this school, and I thought I was your next target to run over. Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose with both index fingers, inhaling and exhaling deeply to try and keep his bubbling rage from exploding. Contrary to popular belief, he does take good care of himself. He keeps up with daily personal hygiene, he gets at least some sleep every day, he always has proper calorie intake, and he washes his belongings to keep them clean. Personal belongings such as his yellow sleeping bag. And yeah, it wasn't that hard to wash out the coffee stain, but that didn't mean he enjoyed the midday surprise the hot liquid left for him when he tried taking a nap. Now he really does have a reason to be petty to Majima. But he's nothing if not tolerant. Midoriya? He breathed out, not even bothering to do the snapping gesture that he'd grown so fond of in only a single day. Explain the first plan to Power Loader before I really do hit him with my car. The child gave a nod of understanding. Since when does he understand the urge to hit people with a car? Whatever, either way, he agrees, and continued without question. The first plan is actually quite minor on your part, but it could possibly help a lot of students. During the annual UA Sports Festival, almost every course has a specialty or role. The Hero course has advanced training in combat and quirk use. The Support course is able to bring support items as long as they design and construct them by themselves, and the business department can use this as an opportunity to scout future members of their agencies or for their legal dealings. But GE has none of those roles or advantages, and as all those students said, they're pretty much just there to make the Hero students look good. Of course, a lot of them are trying to get into the Hero course, but there's only ever one spot available. And it would be cruel to suggest that everyone wants to be heroes, anyway, so much so that would want to get out of G.E as fast as possible. So they would need other goals that don't insult their school course, in order to have a good time and stay motivated. Therefore, we were hoping you could help give them a chance to have a role or just a real shot in general. How long, on average, do you think it would take for one of your students to build a few functioning support items? Midoriya asked, before adding one more comment. And please don't include May in that average. Yes, a very reasonable request. Majima thought it over a bit before answering. About a week, give or take, since they only get about an hour a day to work on personal projects. Good, then starting next year, would you consider leaving your lab open for about an hour each day for a week after school for some other students to come in and develop their items? As soon as Midoriya asked his question, Majima's fearful anticipation was gone. Now it's just fear. You're kidding, right? Shota rolled his eyes. What is it with his coworkers and thinking he's kidding? Does he honestly look like the type of person to tell a joke, let alone laugh at anything? Yesterday excluded. Hatsum's a support course genius and she still blows up the lab every other day. Can you imagine what an inexperienced student could do? Unfortunately, yes. But that's where you come in. May doesn't allow anyone to monitor her project's development because she thinks it dilutes her creative genius, but she's pretty unique. With these other students, you can make it a requirement for them to allow you to overlook their progress and work, that way you can verify their safety. Also, they wouldn't be completely inexperienced. Another requirement we were thinking of adding is making any student that wants to design a support item for sports festival use fill out an assessment to see if they have enough knowledge and experience about the topic before being allowed to work. If you deem them unfit, then you don't have to let them in. In the end, it's all up to you, since you get to decide how many and which students can be in the lab after school. Midoriya finished explaining the first plan to Majima, looking hopeful. So, would you be willing to do it, then? Majima still looked a little unsure, but after hearing all the precautions they came up with, a lot more open to the idea. Finally, after thinking it over and getting puppy eyes from Midoriya, Shota swears those are lethal weapons. It's never been used on him before, but he saw the effects it had on Shoji once. He gave in. Okay, you got me. Can't say no to those eyes. Midoriya tilted his head in confusion. You're only proving his point, Shota thought in fond exasperation. But on one condition, I get the final say on whether or not their product is good to go. I don't do this with my own students, but that's because I know for a fact they can handle themselves. With these kids, if there's even the slightest chance of failure in their items, I'll be forced to reject them. But if it's safe, I'll give my stamp of approval. Can't be too safe, you know? I don't want these kids getting injured on my watch. And just like that, Shota saw Majima in a new light. His coworker was childish and valued humor above his own paycheck, but he was responsible. The guy's been a hero for years. He's seen how badly civilians and heroes alike can get injured in freak accidents, and he doesn't want the same thing to happen in a school where the kids are supposed to feel safe and protected. He may talk like a surfer, but this is something that Shota would always respect him for. Especially after the USJ disaster last year. Of course. Midoriya's cheery voice brought him out of his mind before he could continue down that train of thought. Majima released a breath that nobody knew he was holding. his relief palpable for some reason. Oh, thank God. I was worried you were gonna go all Aizawa on me like you did with Vlad. Did he just use Shota's name? And to describe an action his student did? What exactly was Majima suggesting? Huh? The green-haired child asked. What do you dash? Anyway, Shota was not letting the kid continue that thought. He might not have known what it meant, but judging by Majima's stupidly smug smile, it must be annoying enough for Shota to want to avoid. On to the second change. Problem child, if you will. Right? So, it's known worldwide that UA offers multiple courses: Hero, Support, Business, and General. But even though they're all in the same building, they're mostly kept separate. And, unfortunately, this leads to a lot of bad blood between the departments. Just last year, a lot of students were sad at us first years in heroics because all of the constant villain attacks were annoying them. The problem was only solved after everyone got to know each other in the school festival. But school festivals only happen once a year. Meanwhile, the departments could get into heated battles with each other at any time and have no means of working through them. Just the other day I saw Ayano from business throw a banana peel at Monoma. He deserved it, but that's not the point. In a few years, all of the departments are going to be working together as professionals. Hero students need to be scouted by pros and business students working at agencies. Support technicians need to be hired by said hero students for equipment, and general ed students are just of wild cards for potentially great connections to have. But none of them are going to be happy about that if they all despise each other. Keeping them separate and unable to interact and personally understand one another is just setting them up for failure in the future. Therefore, the kid gave a dramatic pause as he whipped out a piece of paper that had an interior design remodeling of the cafeteria on it. Yesterday during lunch I made a few observations about the atmosphere in the cafeteria. Something I've just noticed is that even though we all have the same lunch PRDS, departments are kept separate by a bunch of retractable barrier posts. In order to merge the sitting area together to get all of them to interact, I thought about just removing the barricades, but then I realized that'd never work. Majima cut into Midoriya's explanation. Why not? Might as well give the kid some breathing time and answer the question for him. Once teenagers find a group of friends and a table to sit at, they tend to stick to that area for the next 3 years. Barriers won't change a thing. Majima gave him a weird look as if wondering why he knew that. Well, he was a teenager once, too, despite apparent popular belief from his class. Michim. So the only other option is to literally force them to move to the same area. Students are possessive of their seating areas. They don't want to sit anywhere other than the table they're used to. If you sit in their seat without permission, they'll most likely kick you out, or just use their quirk to shove you off. Midoriya muttered that last part, but Shota's training as an underground hero has allowed him to hear even the faintest of sounds. He knows for a fact nobody has ever used their quirk to fend someone off from their chair. Sure, they might have politely asked them to move, but quirk usage outside of heroics is strictly prohibited. What kind of school did Midoriya go to that let their students mercilessly run wild like that? It was something Shota would have to save for later, though, because the green-eyed child perked back up from his brief solemn state to continue his rant. Therefore, I suggest we just scatter the arrangement of the tables, and they'll know we did it since they all have numbers on them. The preparation isn't complicated at all, it's their reactions to it that matter. I've made sure to keep certain groups separate, since they may cause more problems in close proximity to each other, and I put others together that I think could get along or at least have a mutual understanding. For example, the Baku squad. The what? They have group names now? And Monoma are as far away as possible, along with all of Monoma's friends. Ida is out of Mei's range since he's still a little salty about last year's festival. And Shinso and Oidrio are separate for the exact same reasons. However, there are also examples of friendly relationships. Kendo is close to Monoma, to drag him away from bothering others, and she's also close to Momo since they have a nice rivalry going on. Yes, that's a perfectly healthy example of a rivalry. Take notes, Midoriya. Kirishima and Tetsu, their clones, Tokoyami and Kurwaro over their mutual love of darkness, Ayano and Ishido, Rumiko and Mei, Mafuyu and Hagakure, and so on. Hopefully with this, They'll build a few friendships and make promises to work together after graduation. His bushy-haired students paused a bit before continuing. Or just tolerate each other in general. Huh, Majima flipped through the paper that now rested in his hands. Well, you've certainly thought this through. But aren't you worried about all the confusion this is going to cause as soon as lunch starts? Shota's eyes darkened, and to all of their surprise, so did Midoriya's. The black-haired man opened his mouth to reply. Yes, actually very. But it's a risk we're going to have to take if we want a positive outcome in the end. I only hope that they keep property damage to a minimum. He sighed. Property damage? Bakugo. One word is all it took for the support hero to immediately understand. Perking up, his cheery student spoke. That reminds me. I've already asked Samenta-sensei to start moving around the tables now, so we don't need your help in that department, but you do have a big role in this. So small yet so big. And what's that? Prevent Mei from testing out her inventions on other students during lunch. Shota's not gonna lie, that's probably one of the hardest jobs in this school. Hatsum isn't even one of his students, but she might as well be, given how much stress she gives him. Last week she upgraded Bakugo's grenades, which then proceeded to malfunction and destroy half of a building in Training Ground Beta. And the girl didn't even bat an eye at the destruction she caused, only pouting at her baby before cackling madly and running to her lab to improve them. He has no problem with the mad cackling, he just hates what comes after and the sleep he loses because of it. There's no doubt in the Erasure hero's mind that given the chance, she'll make grenades for everyone in that cafeteria. Majima didn't seem to be faring too well either, since he's had to deal with her every weekday since last year. The principal and secretary duo just hoped the man wouldn't accidentally get himself blown up in 30 minutes. But let's be honest, that was never an option to begin with. Izuku dug his teeth into the shiny red apple as he stared across the cafeteria, savoring the taste of the juice and the crisp crunch sound it made. Lunch Rush had also offered Aizawa-sensei an apple, but he opted to go for another one of his juice pouches today. He always thought those things would have tasted like, well, nothing. Just flavorless, gray mush that served no other purpose than to keep a person healthy. Because that was the kind of person he'd always seen Aizawa-sensei as, a person who gets nothing but basic necessities and does nothing than the basic necessities. His office desk was devoid of any personal items, he only slept for the minimum requirement of hours, and of course, digests nothing but juice pouches, water, and coffee. But one look at the front of the pouch, the words, Mango Edition, written across it, had him second-guessing everything he thought he knew. Oh, so you're trying to merge the departments together during lunch PRD? Aizawa-sensei paused in his slurping to glance at the lunch hero. Emchim. And then he went right back to slurping. Nice. I always love it when new friendships are born. Izuku heard a dreamy sigh through the hero's mask. I hope the arrangement was thought out though. It'd be a shame if this whole mixer dash, his grumpy teacher mumbled out a quick mixer, was ruined because a few students decided to have a squabble. The hero in training flashed a bright smile. We did. I made sure to match them up based on personality traits, reasons for choosing the academic path they did, hobbies, whether they think the dress is black and blue or white and gold. Favorite dash, Izuku was cut off by a loud, yet nervous, laugh. Well, aren't you a thorough bunch? Unfortunately, there are some occasions when great friendships can cause great problems. The chef said with a sigh, oblivious to the panic he has just caused. Izuku and his teacher turned to share a look with each other, eyes wide in fear of what that statement implied. Wasting no time, the green-haired child turned to the chef. What problems? Which friendships? He was just about restraining himself from shaking the older man's shoulders to get an answer out of him, but he figured it would be perfectly justified. Just the slightest mishap in the next 45 minutes could cause everything to come tumbling down. He had to destroy this hypothetical problem before it got the chance to plant its seed. Kirishima and Tetsu. I love their dynamic, but Jesus Christ, the others' reactions are a pain to deal with. What? Izuku yelled because that's absurd. Those two are amazing together. Their quirks are similar, they both love the word manly. They both interned for fourth kind, hell. They even have the same teeth. How could that bond lead to anything but the manliest, oh God, that word has officially ingrained itself in his brain, friendship in the universe. Oh yeah, the hero stated matter-of-factly, they're so alike, they're practically clones. But that means it's basically double of every part of them. Double worshipping of Crimson Riot, double the word, bro, and double the manliness. The chef shivered, and that's when Izuku realized the word, manly, was ingrained into everyone's brain now. Personally, I think it's adorable, but I can imagine how the boys' friends may find that extremely annoying. Yeah, that makes sense. But at least it's their friends, right? And that means they cherish them enough to tolerate their little habits. It wouldn't cause a big enough problem to start a whole fight, right? Because what kind of psycho would resort to violence for something as simple as that? Izuku's stomach dropped and his head whipped back to face Aizawa-sensei, who seemed to have realized the exact same thing he did at the exact same time. They both know what kind of psycho would do that. They have to deal with that psycho every morning. Kacchan. The explosive blonde would no doubt resort to violence the second Kirishima and Tetsu did their new secret. It's hardly a secret anymore given how often they do it to handshake. He could see it now. The explosions, the fire, the property damage, everything. The one thing he and Aizawa-sensei promised to do was keep school destruction to a minimum, and look at them now. He should have known it was an impossible dream to have. But still, Izuku is nothing if not determined. There's still a way to fix this, he knows there is. All they have to do is rearrange about 2 to 3 tables and problem solved. Sure, the tables are a bit heavy and he might scratch the floor a bit, but there's nothing a little full cowl can't handle and, the green bean more or less heard them before he saw them, their loud footsteps speed walking towards the cafeteria doors and ready to burst through them and scatter at any moment. The door was about 10 feet from the closest table, though, and they seemed to be about halfway down the hall to the door if his hearing was good enough to go by. He'd say they had a solid 30 seconds to fix this mess before anyone would get suspicious and they would miss the reactions to new table placements. You take Tetsu's table and I'll take Bakugo's. Was all he heard from his teacher before they both shot in different directions, Izuku activating full cowl at the highest percentage he could handle to lift up the steel boy's table and sprint to the left. Once he was about 4 seating areas away from its previous spot, he kicked a few tables apart and shifted them down to make room for the table he was currently holding. Relieved that he completed the job, he turned to see if Aizawa-sensei was done yet, but his gaze shifted to the man just in time to see his capture weapon shoot out and wrap around the table, gripping it. His teacher then yanked on his scarf to pull the large object towards him and made contact with it just to slam it into the newly available space on the ground. Far away from Tetsu's spot. Holy Siri, what's the tensile strength on that thing? Izuku asked, his fanboy mode activating. Scratch that, how do you even control it? Someone once told me that it was connected to your brainwaves, which I guess would explain how you're able to dictate where it goes midair, but how could carbon fibers and a metal alloy manage to pull that off? Whenever you activate your quirk, your hair floats, and maybe that's the reason your scarf does too? But does that mean it's laced with your DNA somehow? Oh my God, can you float yourself if you try hard enough? Have you had a minor telekinesis quirk this entire time and never told anybody because of underground hero secrets? Your eyes glow red to float your hair and scarf. Could you move that red light down the rest of your body and even spread it to other objects? This time, it wasn't another person that cut off his rambling, it was Izuku himself. And that's already a rare enough occurrence. The reason he cut himself off wasn't that he realized the students were still approaching, it wasn't because of embarrassment, and it wasn't because of the stunned or awed. What is he talking about? That's impossible. Look on Aizawa-sensei's face, either. It was because he had just noticed where his teacher placed Kacchan's table. Aizawa-sensei. The hero trainee pointed a shaking figure towards him. You placed Kacchan's table right next to mine. And just like that, their stomachs dropped 10 stories further down. Kacchan and his friends couldn't sit anywhere near his table, or else it'd just be another screaming match between them that'll last the whole PRD. They had to move the Baku Squad's table somewhere else, and they had to do it fast. In a split second, Izuku had entered analyzing mode. Minoma was a no-go. Kachin still said it may for the malfunctioning equipment, but that's mostly because he wasn't aware of it the first time. He would gladly demand her for more grenades the first chance he got, and for the sake of Power Loader he couldn't let that happen. He knows Koda and Kachin won't bother each other, but the animal hero generally didn't like loud sounds, and the Baku squad is nothing if not that. He needed someone who was quiet enough to not get on the explosive blonde's nerves, but chill enough to deal with constant memes and crackling. And that's when it hit him, the table of emos. Jairu, Shoji, Tokoyami were the foundation of the table, with Momo making an occasional appearance from time to chat with Jairu. The girl with earjacks could already be considered as a member of the Baku squad. Shoji rarely ever spoke or picked arguments with people, and Tokoyami mostly minded his own business aside from talking about MR with Jairu and speaking of darkness with anyone willing to listen. They were perfect. But the students were practically right behind the doors, so he had to get this done now. Izuku sprinted to the emo's table, kicking and shoving the objects around it to make enough spare room. Finally, when he was satisfied, he turned back around to face Aizawa-sensei and held up his arms. He attempted to communicate with his eyes, and even though he knew it probably looked ridiculous, his message managed to come across. Aizawa nodded silently and activated his quirk, causing his scarf to once again float in the air and shoot forward, wrapping around the table and aiming it towards Izuku. The approaching students halted and he heard the door creak open. It was now or never. But before the plan was put into motion, his teacher told him one thing. A wise statement that he would carry with himself into his career as a pro hero and for the rest of his life. Break a bone and I'm disowning you. And that's when several things happened at once. First, Izuku wondered if there was an actual will he was a part of in the first place. Second, the doors burst open, revealing his entire class confused expressions, Bakugo especially. And third, Aizawa-sensei hurled the table towards him, his scarf fiercely unraveling with a snap. The students' eyes followed the speeding table as it collided into him, fitting perfectly between arms. And they all watched as Izuku immediately slammed the heavy object into the ground, resulting in a few spiderweb cracks to form in the ground. Property damage. Silence filled the room, and the temporary principal and secretary turned to see hundreds of teenagers staring at them with slack jaws and wide eyes. Ida looked like he didn't know if he should risk lecturing a teacher. Kirishima looked like he wanted to yell about manliness. Ashido was recording the whole thing, and Kachin looked really scared for some reason. But that can't be true, because when is he ever scared? The last time he saw anything close to that was during Kamino last year and the sludge incident the year before that, and nothing since. He was acting like he thought he was going to be slammed into the ground next, and now that the one for all user thinks about it, he looked like he had this morning when he glared at him. Oh, thank God. That all but confirms he's not scared. Because when would Kachin ever be scared of him? And that's when he realized that he still had to get out of this room in one piece with Aizawa-sensei. He looked to his teacher in support and found absolutely no mercy, just a sheet-eating grin as he enjoyed the boy's pain. Izuku pouted, but his mood severely brightened once he saw his teacher realize that he was also the subject of attention. Why are all of you just standing and staring? Oh, so he was going with the feign ignorance technique. Tactical move. He should write this down when he gets back to the office. Lunch already started. You want the food to get cold? That subtle threat sobered them up, all right, and suddenly the duo were forgotten in favor of lining up for their meals. Izuku didn't know whether to be relieved or insulted, but he'll settle for the former. As silently and inconspicuously as possible, Izuku and Aizawa-sensei hopped off their tables and made their way to the door, almost making it out without anyone seeing them. Almost. Right as they were about 3 feet from the door, Kaminari popped up in front of them with an incredulous but highly amused expression on his face. Why were you guys here way before us? He asked, and Izuku froze. God, freezing is just more suspicious. And why does he keep acting like he's doing something illegal? Ashido popped up right beside him as she typed on her phone. It's honestly pure luck I was already recording when I came in here, just sent that video to like the entire class. She giggled. I'm sorry, what? She sent that to the class. Did it look more embarrassing than he had originally thought? Oh Lord, imagine if Kachin sees it and laughs. Imagine if Monoma sees it and laughs. He'll be destroyed. And why did Aizawa-sensei just yeet a table at you? Kaminari pressed, seemingly oblivious to Izuku's inner meltdown. Maybe the meltdown was the reason for what he did next, though not being in the right headspace and all that. Not thinking clearly enough to understand the consequences a single sentence would bring him in the future. And because of that, he shrugged and replied. The beach was empty. Kaminari glowed. Shota thought he couldn't possibly be more disappointed in his students, and once again, he was proved wrong. It took 5 minutes, 5 goddamn minutes, of talking before he and his secretary could finally escape the iron clutches of Kaminari, Ashido, and their endless, Vine references. Whatever that thing was. The grumpy teacher had heard things he didn't expect nor want to hear. His eyes already have chronic pain, and his students managed to give him ear pain now too. It was a cultural reset that made him realize just how much he hated dealing with today's youth. 69 cents, Miss Keisha, Jared, burnt chicken nugget, and so much more. All of which made absolutely no sense to him, but perfect sense to Midoriya. The green-haired kid managed to understand and reply to everything that came out of the electric blonde's mouth. Was it some sort of secret language they developed when talking around adults? He didn't know. One thing he did know is that this might be the first time but definitely won't be the last. It was only when Shota saw the other UA students' expressions morph to confusion at the new seating arrangement, and when he heard Midoriya say something along the lines of adult version, that he decided to step in. Shota shot out his capture weapon, making sure to cover the kid's mouth with the scarf, effectively picking up and silencing the green-eyed child. Mido no. Come back. Kaminari yelled, dropping to his knees and clutching his heart as Ashido splashed water on his face to replicate tears. What the actual hell is wrong with his students? Is this how other classes act, or is he just eternally cursed to handle these demon spawns? Rolling his eyes, Shota dragged the floating Midoriya out of the hallway and into the faculty office, only letting him down once he was sure the door was closed and they could no longer hear the blonde boys shouting of memes. Work ahead? Yeah, I sure hope it does. The underground hero gave him an incredulous look. The very first thing you say. He breathed out. Vine! Exclaimed a voice from behind him. Power Loader halted in the middle of photocopying documents to stare at them. Oh, you've got to be kidding. Chris, is that a wee dash? No. He was not going to have a repeat of that awful experience. He inwardly smirked as Majima shivered from the intensity of his bright red gaze, slithering back to the photocopier like a snake. It was at that moment he noticed the exact documents the man was copying in the first place, the ones for plan. He turned around to face Midoriya, who by the way looked a little downtrodden at the missed opportunity of having a horrible conversation with the support hero. Problem child. The boy perked up, getting right back into business mode. Gather all the teachers in here. I'm gonna get this vote done as quickly as possible so we can observe the cafeteria. And he snatched the stack of papers from Majima, handing them over to his student. Give them all one of these to look over. Right. The boy did a two-fingered salute and ran off to God knows where on a mission to track down all of his coworkers. How did the boy know where all of them were during their lunch break? He didn't know, and he also figured it was better if he never found out. Shota sighed and plopped down in his original desk chair, the one he had before becoming principal. It's only been 2 days, but this feels strangely foreign. Which was odd, considering he's sat in that one for years. Maybe it's because as soon as he got a taste of something bigger, something more powerful, he didn't want to go back to what his life was before. He could only imagine how annoying it's going to be next Tuesday when he gives up the position forever. In all honesty, his new melodramatic attitude about this job was pissing him off. Did he somehow forget the fact that he never wanted this in the first place? So what if he doesn't do this kind of thing ever again? Or if he never gets another chance to freak his coworkers out by singling them out in meetings? And so what if Midoriya never gets to be his secretary again? Both of them knew that their roles this week weren't intended to be permanent. So why does he feel disappointed? What's got you all down in the dumps, senpai? Shota was shaken out of his stupor by the cheery voice of 13, skipping through the door. Technically no one could ever know if they were really happy since their black hole body didn't allow them to show any facial expressions, but it was pretty easy to assume. Midoriya must have found 13 first in the tea parties he mentioned, meaning that the next person would probably be. Shota's just having an existential crisis now that he's accepted fatherhood. Namuri chimed in, a sly smirk on her face. Okay, first of all, he's always having an existential crisis. That shouldn't be news to anyone in this room. Honestly, the number of times he's contemplated his reason for his pitiful existence on this earth should be concerning. And second, the hell did she mean by fatherhood? Excuse me? Namuri opened her mouth, probably a snarky reply at the ready, but she never got a chance as the door burst open again, drawing all of their attention to the remaining staff that just came in. How did Midoriya know about our book club meetings? Cementos whispered to Ectoplasm. Lunch Rush told me about that stunt your student pulled in the cafeteria today. Toshinori, you better than the gods that you finally taught him how to use his strength without breaking all his bones. Recovery Girl chided, lightly hitting All Might's arm with her purse as he let out a loud choke of blood. Shota cringed. Why is no one addressing how much blood the guy is losing? The guy's a cough away from death at this point. Someone needs to tell him to lay low on stressful activities. He expected the students to not understand, but Recover Girl? Surely she's discussed this topic with him, right? Unless she has too much on her plate. That's not a good sign for anyone in this building. Is she overworked? Should they? No, 3 plans is enough for one day. He'll settle this new development with Midoriya tomorrow. He knows the nurse's office better than anyone at this point and no doubt has some insider info. Aizawa-kun. Shota broke away from his thought process to stare at the source of the voice. Vlad King. The man with sharp canines gave a nervous, wobbly smile as he attempted to give the underground hero a friendly wave. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Ugh, if that guy says anything rude to him or his student today he'll strangle you with my scarf. See, he said that out loud. Hizashi let out an ugly snort and tried to cover it with a cough. Absolutely no one bought it. Vlad flinched with wide eyes and gave a fearful laugh, inching into the farthest corner to go unnoticed. Once again it didn't work. But it was a pitiful enough effort to get the annoyed teacher to look away and face everyone else in the room. Most importantly, Midoriya, who was currently doing the bouncing thing he did so often as he bounded around the room handing out the papers, finally pausing to stand next to All Might. Because of course, as much as I'd rather go through with this by myself, I am required to hold another vote. Immediately, the temperature in the room felt like it had dropped several degrees as a chill went down his co-workers' spines. No one would dare suggest such a thing, but Shota had a feeling it was because they all remember what happened yesterday. None of them wanted to be his or Midoriya's next target to verbally destroy. Quite a shame, that might have been the one thing he was looking forward to. All of you can calm down, it's not as serious as yesterday's course of action. Just a small change that I think everyone would appreciate. He gestured to the paper and watched as they all began to read it over, scanning every line with their eyes. Snipe was the first to speak up. It's a permission slip? But for what? Shota felt like he could have explained. It was a simple answer and even with his recent decrease in sleep, it wouldn't have been a hassle for him. But then again he really liked having the power of choosing not to. Therefore, the black-haired man inwardly smirked as he snapped his fingers and pointed to Midoriya. Cue the ranting. Basically for everything. Off-site training camps for heroics, field trips to labs for support, and visiting hero agencies for business. All of them have the potential to be extremely dangerous. Any student faces the risk of being hurt during those events, and just last year we got quite a few complaints from parents about not being made aware of our traveling. Therefore, for everyone's peace of mind, it would be better to send out permission slips before the staff randomly ships their students off to these locations. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure why you guys didn't do this in the first place. Shota nodded. It was such a simple task, yet none of them had ever suggested it to Nizu. His co-workers lowered their heads and the underground hero watched in amusement as they were chastised by a student. But anyway, as you can see in the third paragraph of the front side, it states that UA is not liable for any items the children lose, any consequences the children might face from the location's employees for their misbehavior, and of course, any injuries they may sustain. However, The paper also says that that doesn't mean the school won't help out. For example, every single member of staff here is certified in medical training, and sometimes even Recovery Girl joins for extra precautions. Midoriya's volume lowered to the same one he used while muttering. But that means there's no actual nurse in this school during those PRDS of time, which is really bad actually. Oh, so Shota wasn't exaggerating when he said Recovery Girl was overworked. He finds it hard to believe that everyone, including himself, ever questioned the lack of medical staff in this school. Shizenji's quirk is remarkable, but it's not all-powerful. There are times when her quirk is probably the most unsuited for certain injuries. And if they have no one else to take care of the injured student or hero then? It was a scary thought, to be honest. Oh, and by the way, this applies to in-school events too, such as the sports festival. For support, some general education, and most hero students it's a good chance to get noticed, but to others, it's like the worst thing ever and they shouldn't be forced to participate. One reason is that everyone hates a school that forces physical activities, another reason is that it's useless to business course, and the third reason is that it poses a great risk to those aiming for the underground. Midoriya's going off script. Either that or there were actually 3 pages worth of his speech in his notebook instead of the 2 pages that Shota saw. Take Tokoyami and Shinso, for example. Last year, Tokoyami's one-on-one battle with Kachin revealed his weakness and sensitivity to light. If any of the villains were watching and paying close attention to him, they'd realize that all they'd need in the future to take him down is a flashlight. For Shinso, his quirk entirely depends on others not knowing how it works, or else it's once again useless since all they'd have to do is keep their mouth shut during the duration of the fight. So specific students should also be able to opt out. The jumpsuit-clad teacher suddenly tensed as his mind raced. Why hadn't he thought of those risks before? Shinso, Tokoyami, and even Todoroki had some of their weaknesses and trade secrets exposed at the festival when really it should be kept on the down low. Was this the same danger he himself had faced in his first sports festival? Back then, the only way for him to get in was to be the center of attention and score first place, no matter how much he hated it. Back then, he didn't have his support items. Everyone could see how his quirk was activated, the side effects of floating hair, and the drawbacks of his dry eye. To think that there might have been a villain out there watching and waiting to strike. He needed to take care of this. It's a good point, Snipe pointed out, but the whole purpose of hero students competing at the sports festival is to show off what they've learned to the heroes and agencies. If they don't participate, they won't get noticed, and that'll set them behind not only for internships but for work studies later on too. Students who choose to opt out, and even those who don't, should also be given an ulterior way to show off their skills and potential to heroes and agencies for internships. A way that doesn't involve broadcasting it for the whole world to see. Shota droned, his bored voice contrasting his deeply attentive eyes. They all saw what happened with Momo last year during her fight with Tokoyami. The people watching weren't able to see how useful her quirk was, how she mastered the use of several weapons, and how quick-thinking she was. He wants all of his students to have the best opportunities, so he'll never let something like that risk their careers ever again. Sometime this week that'll have to be handled, he said to himself, but noting the way Midoriya wrote down every word. Anyway, everyone in favor of permission slips say aye, everyone in opposition say nay and sleep with one eye open. Once again it was unanimous. Shota chewed on his pencil as he waited for the final bell of last PRD homeroom to ring, deep in thought. Today's lunch scheme had been a success, even better than he had expected. On his way back to the classroom, he'd noticed a few support students making friendly small talk with 2B, and he even saw some of his own students making plans with business and gen ed kids to hang out at the mall this weekend. It was all very social. And while that's a great accomplishment on his and his secretary's part, he still doesn't understand how these kids are able to easily talk with each other without awkward silences and dirty glares. He's only able to do that around a few people like Mike. Once again, Hizashi had told him he'd drive him back home. He appreciated the thought, but he didn't know why his friend kept offering if he knew he had paperwork to handle before he left. Not that the underground hero minded, though, it was no trouble to wait a little longer for the guy. But he didn't want the loud blonde to try and rush his work. Speed doesn't equal quality, after all. That's the same thing Recovery Girl told Tensei back in their second year of UA after he'd ended up in her office for the third time that week. Recovery Girl. That reminds him. It seemed that with each new problem they solved, another one popped up in its place. Or rather, 3 more popped up in its place, judging by the list in Midoriya's notebook. Shota's not gonna lie, he's pretty disappointed in himself and the school board. Everyone in the media painted UA as this Golden Gate paradise of society, occupied by the brightest minds that are brimming with potential. And while they aren't exactly wrong, they were also pretty ignorant. When you're presented with an establishment that's got such a positive light shown on it, you tend not to question it. You take what you get because you know that the moment you look too deep into it, you'll never be able to enjoy it the same way again. And no matter how much he hates to admit it, Shota fell into that same trap. This whole society turning a blind eye might have been in UA's favor when it came to public relations and donors, but he knows it won't stay that way for long. He doesn't know who and he doesn't know when, but someday, someone too curious for their own good is going to come along and they're going to tear that carefully constructed image to the ground. Shota took the pencil out of his mouth, eyes lifting to stare at Midoriya as he conversed with his friends. Maybe that person is already here. At least, if it's Midoriya, the gruff teacher knows that no matter how far the boy tears it down, he'll put just as much determination into building it back up. Bigger, brighter, and so much better than it was before. And he can't wait for the day when everyone else realizes that too. Honestly, how hasn't anyone else seen it? It's right there. An incredible mind sitting right under their noses. And that's when it occurred to Shota that Midoriya, in a way, is just like UA. Hero worshipping, shining and strong. That's what everyone sees. No one sees what's underneath. He hates this horribly cheesy expression, but that kid is just a happy-go-lucky onion. He's got layers. He thinks he has a pretty good idea of what's underneath, though. Undying loyalty to his friends and family, even a random stranger on the street, that causes him to desperately protect them with his life, ignoring how injured he gets in the process. An insane ability to empathize and understand the struggles of people around him, never downplaying the physical and mental tolls those struggles took on them and defending them with a passion that'd almost make you think he was speaking about himself. Finally, a calculating mind to analyze everyone and everything around him. He grasps a good enough understanding of a person's emotional state to accurately determine how to manipulate them into doing what he intends them to. He notes down the atmospheres, behavior, and past actions of a person in order to predict the exact move they'll make next in a fight, and find the best way to take them down because of it. And most importantly, his need to understand the complex workings of any quirk he comes across. Just over an hour ago, Midoriya had asked him questions about his quirk, more questions than anyone else had ever bothered to ask about something so bland and boring as erasure. The kid considered things he'd never even given a second thought to. A minor telekinesis quirk? Floating his entire body? Being able to wield red light and float objects around him? It all seemed so crazy, but he definitely had the urge to test it all out now. Still, he wondered why the green-haired child felt the need to analyze quirks in the first place. Don't get him wrong, it's a very valuable skill to have as a hero and one he wishes his other students had, too, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a little unusual. Most kids his age, when thinking about becoming heroes, only focused on their own quirks, never anybody else's. Their only concern was getting stronger and punching harder, nothing more, nothing less. And with a quirk like Midoriya's, one that was so eerily similar to All Might's, he would have thought it'd be the same case. The tired teacher sighed, mentally promising himself that he'd ask that question to the boy's face one day. Then a bush of green hair popped up in front of his face, and for the first time in Shota's life, he questioned if Midoriya had a minor psychic quirk, too. Aizawa-sensei, his student cheerfully exclaimed, a megawatt smile on his face that put Kaminari to shame. Problem child. You know those questions I asked you in the cafeteria? How could he forget? I have another one. Shota's not one to be curious, but shoot. He flipped his pencil around his fingers. What would happen if you activated your quirk while staring into a mirror? Shota tensed. He was expecting a wild question, yes, but he didn't know it'd be a question he already had an answer to. Back in high school, Hisashi had dared him to do this exact thing, and the next thing he knew, he had a concussion. Making direct eye contact, a high-pitched whining sound will gradually increase in volume over the span of 5 seconds. The mirror will start shaking until eventually, it cracks. And finally, a red flash of light will shoot out and give me a concussion. He grumbled out his explanation just to see Midoriya staring at him with wide eyes. That's really specific. And the next thing Shota knew, his student had his notebook out and was furiously jotting this new information down. The black-eyed man watched the pencil fly across the page and determined whether or not it would be a good idea to his next question. He decided he'll deal with any hypothetical consequences later. Say, problem child, green eyes lifted to meet his, why do you analyze quirks? The eyes flashed with an emotion he couldn't determine, but the hesitation told him that the kid was still unsure if he should answer or not. Eventually he did, much more honestly than Shota expected him to. I was a late bloomer. Like really late. When I was 4 I was, falsely diagnosed as quirkless. Oh, that's why he was so adamant about quirkless heroes. But just how late of a bloomer? And everyone told me to give up on trying to be a hero, but I still thought that even without a quirk I could do it. So as soon as I learned how to read and write, I started making hero analysis notebooks. I'd find their weaknesses and strengths so that I could determine a way to exploit or replicate them, either with a support item or with my own brain and fighting skills. I figured that if I didn't have a quirk of my own to work with, I could work against everyone else's. An admirable strategy, one that would most likely work, too. But the phrasing is what made the tired man just a tad bit unsettled. Exploiting the hero's quirks. Working against them, it also sounded very. Don't get him wrong, it's stupid to suggest Midoriya would consider being a villain. With a heart of gold like that? It's DMN near impossible. But just because he wouldn't, doesn't mean he couldn't. Shota knows how the quirkless are treated in this society, even the elderly. They're neglected, outcast, abused, anything horrible you can think of is what happens to them. It's almost like having a quirk that's considered villainous, only way worse. At least with a villainous quirk, people know not to mess with you, they consider you dangerous. But no quirk at all? You aren't even good enough to register as a threat. You're nothing. You're worthless. Of course, Shota knows that's complete CRP, but others aren't as bright when it comes to this subject. In any case, that's not the point. The reason there are so many villains is that they felt like they had no other option. Society abandoned them, so they turned to the dark side, a side they knew would never banish them and would welcome them with open arms. If Midoriya hadn't been as selfless and heroic, or maybe hadn't worshipped All Might as much as he did now, and if he had to live the rest of his life being shunned by the rest of the population, then he didn't even want to think about what could have happened. A brain like that and a strong motive? The world would fall to its knees. But of course, I ended up getting a quirk. The green-haired child chuckled while rubbing the back of his neck, although his voice seemed to have a new edge of sadness to it. So I guess the analysis was pretty much useless in the end. Hell no. Absolutely not. Shota stated, not even a smidge of uncertainty in his voice. Just because you have a quirk now, doesn't mean your analysis notebooks don't have extreme value. If anything, it's your strongest advantage. I suggest you start thinking of it as such. His student looked at him like he'd grown a second head, numbly nodding along to his words. Well, that's progress at least. I also think you should consider analyzing villains' quirks, that way you can exploit the weaknesses you find in battle. He paused a bit before saying the next part. And maybe try converting your notebooks to an original coded language. You never know who might end up taking a look at the information in there. Right. And just like that, the regular Midoriya was back, writing down his suggestions in his notebook with a look of awe in his eyes. But just when he thought the conversation was over and done with, especially considering the fact that the bell had already rung a few minutes ago, the forest-eyed boy lifted his head. Oh, I forgot to mention the second reason. His teacher nodded his head, signaling for him to elaborate. My dad's also really interested in quirks, he thinks about them even more than I do. He's actually the one that bought me all my notebooks and novels published by famous quirk analyzers. Sometimes he even reads them. If he didn't already have a job, I'd say he was one of those. It was that moment that Midoriya noticed the empty classroom, face flushing in embarrassment as he realized just how long he'd been talking. Yelling out, "Sorry, bye," and sprinting out the door. Shota was left frozen, staring at the spot his student was just standing in. This enigma of a father kept making appearances in his students and his conversations. And the more he learned about him, the more curious he was. A guy with a glare more petrifying than his son's, and an even better analyzer? The man got more terrifying by the second.